All right, chapter 11, real estate contracts, big part of the business. There's going to be a lot of terms and questions on exams from this chapter. Um, in this chapter, we're going to learn to describe the essential elements of a valid contract, including the effects of the statute of frauds. We're going to identify different types of contracts and issues that affect the validity of contracts. And we're going to learn some of those terms as well, about uh, validity, unenforceable, enforceable contracts, void contracts. We're going to learn about some of those terms. We're going to explain various contracts used in the real estate business as well. So, what is a contract? Well, a contract is a voluntary agreement between legally competent parties to perform or refrain from performing some legal act. In order for any contract to be valid, it has to be supported by legal consideration, meaning there has to be something of value exchanged between the parties in order for any contract to be valid. You can't have a contract that holds one party to the contract, but the other party's not offering anything in return. Both parties have to give something of value in order for that contract to be enforceable. So let's highlight a contract may be defined as a voluntary agreement between competent parties to perform or refrain from performing some legal act that's supported by legal consideration. Consideration is that compensation you receive. And we're going to learn about three forms of consideration in this chapter. So let's first get into what are the four essential elements of a contract. We have competent parties, offer and acceptance, consideration, and legality of the object or purpose of the contract. The contract must not be against public policy or against the law. So let's highlight here, page 196. Let's write the number 4 in front of that and highlight essential elements of a valid contract. There are 4 essential elements to a valid contract. Competent parties, offer and acceptance, consideration, and legality of the object. And then we're going to highlight consideration under here and the 3 legal forms of consideration. I also underlined them. Legal tender, exchange of value, and love and affection. So a valid contract may be oral. Verbal contracts are legal. See, we're going to be learning about contract law in general, and we're going to be learning about specific real estate contract law. So we have to be familiar with the general laws of the state when it comes to contracts, and we're going to need to learn about specifically real estate contract law. So right now, we're just learning the basic essentials of any valid contract in general. All right. And then a valid contract can be verbal and still be enforceable. But we're going to learn how real estate contracts have to always be in writing. We'll get into that. We'll slowly go step by step here. And there's something called the parole evidence rule that states if one person has a verbal contract and another one has the contract in writing, the court will dismiss the verbal contract in favor of the one who has evidence. That's why they call it the parole evidence rule. They will dismiss the contract that doesn't have evidence, that's just verbal. Doesn't matter if you got witnesses, it's just a verbal contract, versus one who actually has it in writing. They have the evidence. Okay. So let's just highlight those notes as right now, and then we'll get into each one. Now, I have a note here about minors. In the law 37-2-30, it talks about minor spouses. A minor is anybody who's under the age of 18. So minor spouses and their authority to join adult spouses in transfer of realty. We'll talk about that in a moment. We'll talk about what you need to know for exams, and then we'll talk about real life. Because I don't think the exams caught up with real life, because the exams are based off of laws that are still on the books. And there's a law on the books still that says minor spouses have the authority to sign contracts, and those contracts will be valid. But there's a little catch to that. New Jersey you can no longer be a minor and get married. So you can't be a minor and be a spouse to begin with. In the past, you could get married with parental consent as young as 16, I think it was. But New Jersey changed the law with all that, illegal immigration going on and everything, and different cultures from different countries. You have people coming over the border that in their culture, it's perfectly fine for a 60-year-old man to marry a 9-year-old child. That stuff don't fly, and that was never legal here in the United States to begin with. The youngest it could be is 16. But the thing is, you'd have some cultures, it's okay. So what they'll do is you had now people that were selling their children and exchanging them at 16. So there were all kinds of child advocacy groups, and it was something that was being pushed at the time during President Trump's first presidency. He was huge on child protections. He actually passed a lot of presidential orders and even about holding people responsible who are complicit in those child traffickers. They were sex trafficking minors. So you almost seen overnight when he made a presidential order that outlawed or made it illegal, and just as the penalties would be just the same for the human sex traffickers as it would be for those who were complicit, allowing it to happen on their platforms. You had a lot of things like Craigslist that they would advertise, massage services or dating and stuff, and that was all like prostitution. You've seen it disappear overnight. When he passed that presidential order, some of these websites were taken down altogether because even though they claimed, oh, well, we're not a part of it. Yeah, but your platform is allowing it to occur. You could be held just as guilty as that crime and jailed for it if you let it occur. And that's the way it should be. So he came down pretty hard on that. And so in New Jersey, you had these child advocacy groups that were looking out for the safety of children, and they saw that they had someone who was going to support them at the presidential level, that this was the time for them to make their move here in New Jersey. So in New Jersey, they actually worked on legislation, and they passed the law, and they managed to have it overturned so that minors can no longer be married, even under any circumstance, even with parental consent. In the past, it was allowable. No more. Okay.
I just looked it up. It says there are still 34 states that allow child marriage.
Not New Jersey. Under no circumstance in New Jersey do they allow it.
That's so crazy, though.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But New Jersey, even though we had these advocacy groups that managed to get this law passed, that under no circumstances can a minor be considered an adult and get married. There's still a law in the book that says, and this is the law, minor spouses have the authority to join adult spouses in the transfer of realty. So because that law is still on the books, even though technically they should have.
Hey, what if somebody comes from a different state and they're already a child that's married?
I don't know if New Jersey recognizes child marriages from other states.
Mm.
Okay. So I don't know, but this is pertaining to real estate in New Jersey anyway. So that wouldn't even apply to this situation.
No, I'm saying if they're moving from New
Yeah,
Jersey.
I know. We're just talking about in general about the child marriages, but this is specifically talking about New Jersey law and real estate pertaining to real estate here in New Jersey. So the minor spouses, because there's a law on the books still. Remember, I told you on your exams, if there's ever an exception to the rule, you always follow the exception rather than the rule. Well, I guess they look at this, even though there's a law that prevents minors from being married, there's still a law in the books that says if you are a minor and you're married, so they're following that because there's still a law in the books pertaining to it, even though it should never come into play anymore in New Jersey. So if you get a question on exams and asks when can a minor be considered an adult in New Jersey, or when can a contract be valid with a minor to sell real estate, it's only if the minor is married. That would still be a correct answer on exams, even though the situation should never arise. You follow what I'm saying? That's the only reason why I'm going through this whole
Yeah.
that's the only reason why I'm going through this whole explanation here. Because even though the law specifically prohibits this, there's still an old law that's on the books that talks about minors that are married. And so the school exam, PSI, the exam center, they still have questions that refer to it. So because there's a law on the books. Now, I tried explaining this to PSI. I tried explaining this to the Real Estate Commission, but they Real Estate Commission don't know because they don't know the questions on the exam. PSI does, and I guess they play stupid because they say, well, we have professionals, they scour the legal diaries and everything. Yeah, you're looking at a law that's still in the book, but probably shouldn't be because there's another law that was passed that makes it illegal. Minors cannot get married under any circumstances in New Jersey. And I'll show you the proof of it too. So I bring the receipts. All right. So do you guys have all these highlights? Once you do, I'm going to go to the next slide, which is my.
Sorry. So what was the right answer for the test?
Oh, well, I'll show you on the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll show you with the explanation. I mean, the right answer would be when would a contract with when could a contract with a minor be enforceable? It's if they're married.
They're married. Okay.
Even though we know that they can't get married in New Jersey, right? But that's still the right answer on the exam because there's another law, because of this law in the book that says minor spouses have the authority to join their spouses in the transfer of realty. You know, so because there's a law still on the books, but in reality, it should never come into play. But that's still an exam question they have. So I want to make sure that you guys understand that even though that's the correct answer on an exam, in real life, shouldn't happen. Okay. So instead of reading this here, I just have you highlighted in the books. We're going to go to the next slide now, where I explain each one and I have a little write-up with my explanations here, okay, of the 4 essential elements. So competent parties. What is a competent? Okay, first of all, you need to memorize what are the 4 essential elements. Competent parties, offer and acceptance, consideration, and legality of the object. Then you need to know what are the 3 legal forms of consideration. Legal tender, that's money or a mortgage loan. Exchange of value, I give you my cell phone in exchange for something. I'll give you this in exchange for that. So it's like bartering, you know. Or I'll perform this service for you in exchange for a good, okay? Or love and affection. No, they're not talking about prostitution. They're talking about like a family member. You know, you may give your house to your child because you have love and affection for each other. Courts do consider that a form of legal consideration, but it should be accompanied by a letter that says that this is in fact a gift. That's why it's love and affection is the consideration for that gift. Okay, so competent parties. You have to be at least 18 years old, legal age in New Jersey. If under 18, a contract is voidable and can be voided by the minor because they're not a competent party. For exam purposes only, though, not in real life, because the explanation I just gave you, because the laws have changed to protect minors. They're no longer allowed to get married, even with parental consent. The law still has a statute that says a married minor can sign contracts, even though the law does not allow them to anymore, to be married. So, for exam purposes only, this is what you're going to need to know. A minor under the age of 18 who is married would be considered an adult, and contracts they enter into would be legally binding. So, when would a contract with a minor be legal and binding? If they're married. That's the correct answer for exams. Not real life, just exams. Okay. Now, to be a competent, yeah.
Real life, if they're already married, even if they didn't get married in New Jersey, do we still follow this rule?
Well, this is for exams only.
But in real life, a minor moving to New Jersey and they're looking for a property and they're married to an adult, are they like legally able to enter a contract?
What is a competent party?
Someone that's 18 years of legal age.
And sound mind. You're sane, sober adults with no mental disease or defect, right? Okay. Right. So you just answered your own question now. You got to be 18 years of age.
Okay, so that comes first.
Yeah. Okay. This is the old law. Okay. And because there's an old law still on the books pertaining to that. But this is when signing contracts in New Jersey, can a minor ever be considered an adult? No. So it's 18 years of age. But for exam purposes only, married minors can be considered adults and the contracts with them would be legally binding. So your question would be more like, does New Jersey recognize marriages to minors, right? And I would assume no, but you know what happens when you assume? You know, you really gotta, that's a legal question. So I guess only the courts would be able to really ask that. But let me ask AI, see if AI knows. Okay, let's ask my co-pilot here. In New Jersey, marriage to minors is no longer legal. Does New Jersey recognize marriage to a minor that happened in another state? Let's see that. Okay, so let's see what it says here. I'll pull it up and you guys can read it along with me. Keep in mind, AI, everything you see on AI is not necessarily truthful either. It just scours the internet and tries to find the best answer. So we really need to, we can't take this as a solid answer, but we'll go with it and resources, and you got to put some of your own research into it too. But it says, yes, New Jersey will generally recognize a marriage involving a minor if it was valid in the state where it was performed, even though New Jersey itself no longer allows any marriage of a minor. This recognition is subject to one important limitation. The marriage must not violate New Jersey's strong public policy. So what does that tell you? I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer. So let's see, valid where celebrated. New Jersey follows the longstanding principle that a marriage is valid where performed is valid everywhere, unless it violates New Jersey's public policy. This confirmed in New Jersey municipal guidance. So long as your out-of-state marriage is consistent with the laws and public policy of New Jersey, your marriage is valid and recognized in the state. What does that mean? You'd have to do more research on this in order to find that out, it seems like. So, New Jersey enacted one of the strictest child marriage bans in the country, prohibiting all marriages involving anyone under 18 without exception. This reflects a strong public policy against child marriage. However, New Jersey has not enacted a statute declaring out-of-state minor marriages void. Instead, NJ applies the general rule. If the marriage was lawful in the state where it occurred, NJ will usually recognize it. New Jersey only refuses recognition when the marriage is repugnant to the public policy of the state. I guess like to a
What?
five.
I don't get that.
It's like repugnant, like to a 5-year-old, I guess. Like really.
Oh, like that's against public policy and to the public.
Yeah, to the point that it's repugnant. It's okay. So, I mean, this seems like they're repeating the same thing in multiple different ways.
Well, it says a child very young and exploitation and trafficking.
Yeah.
Oh, I get it. I get it.
So we could also ask it in another way.
When it comes to real estate,
like real estate ownership between an adult and a minor, is the minor can the contract of sale with a minor be considered valid any longer? Okay, let's see if that helps. I don't know. Yes, a minor can hold title to real estate in New Jersey, but a contract signed by a minor is not fully enforceable because minors lack legal capacity to the contract. The minor's ownership is valid, but the contract of sale is voidable, not automatically void. Okay. So it's voidable and not automatically void. Below is the full breakdown. So minors can own real estate. We got that. Under New Jersey law, minor's contract is voidable at the minor's option. So it's up to the minor, which is weird because they're not a competent party. So the minor can disaffirm the contract before turning 18 within a reasonable time after turning 18. The adult party cannot disaffirm it because they're a competent party when they signed it. This applies to real estate contracts, including contracts of sale. So it's voidable by the minor.
Okay, that makes sense, I guess. If they want to leave.
Yeah. Title companies in New Jersey will not insure a sale involving a minor's signature without a court-appointed guardian or court-approved approval of the sale. Who's the guardian? The married adult? Yes. Questions. See, when it comes to legality of things, you could have a law that says one thing, but then it really requires deeper research. The law is not so cut and dry with a lot of these topics. There's either
really quickly.
Yeah, there's usually more depth to it, and we could talk about this all day. It could turn into a law class, but I'm not an attorney, so I can't teach it. Right? I could do research and I could figure out the law stuff and have my opinions on it, but ultimately, a lot of these things, even an attorney may not be able to give you a solid answer, because it needs to go before a court and either a jury or judge to render a decision. So all legal things are not so cut and dry. So let's just get to what we need to know for your exams without looking too deep into it and confusing anybody. Okay, so is a contract with a minor valid? If so, when?
Yes, if they're married.
Yes, if they're married. That would be the correct answer for exams. Ding, 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 ding. Okay. All right. So so that's all we need to know about that for exams. Okay. Contracts with minors are valid and enforceable. If the minor is married, then they would be considered an adult. That's the correct answer for exams. Okay, now you also have to have offer and acceptance. Well, what is offer and acceptance? It's also known as mutual assent. When the parties are in agreement to all the terms of the contract, it's said that they have come to a meeting of the minds. So, what is a meeting of the minds? It's when we're aware of, fully understand, and are in agreement of all the terms on the contract. Okay. So the parties are aware of and in agreement to all the terms of the contract, which must clearly be stated and understood by the parties. So for the school exam, the definition of a meeting of the minds is a little narrower. They focus on the financing. And so for state exam, it's the broader definition. What is a meeting of the minds? It's when the parties are aware of and in agreement on all the terms of the contract. Boom. That said, we've come to a meeting of the minds. We're here, right? And we got an understanding going on between us. But for school exam focuses on the financial aspects of it. So the correct answer for exams on the questions on the school exam is, what is the meeting of the minds? When the parties are in agreement on price, down payment, and how you coming up with the rest of the cash, which we call the financing method. Okay, so price, down payment, and financing method is the definition of the meeting of the minds for school exam. For state exam, it's the broader definition when the parties are aware of and in agreement on all the major points of the contract, all the points of the contract. Okay. And consideration. In order for any contract to be enforceable and valid, the parties have to give or receive something from each other in the exchange. It's the entire purchase price. Now, there are three legal forms of consideration. Legal tender, that's money or a mortgage loan. In New Jersey, deeds cannot be recorded in the public record unless the full purchase price amount is listed. You cannot just state $1 as the sale price. But I could pull up tax records and show you where $1 is listed as the sales price. How did they do that? Well, there was no sale. It could have been a correction to the deed or a simple removal of somebody from the deed because they died. But there was no transfer of ownership that took place. Maybe they refinanced. So the record was updated and now it just shows $1 because it was just an update to the record, but there was no transfer of ownership that's being recorded. So the full sale price doesn't need to be in there anymore. They're just putting down any number. So they put down $1 and then they updated the record. Okay, so that's why if you ever see $1 listed in the public records, that's why. Now, there has to be an exchange of something of value, whether it's goods or services. Okay, that's another form of legal consideration. It's like bartering. I'm going to give you this item in exchange for that item, or I'm going to perform this act for you and do this job for you in exchange for this item. Okay, that's a form of legal consideration as well. And so is love and affection. If it's a gift to a relative, you can't just record $1 as the sales price in the record, though. It should be accompanied by letter explaining that it was a gift, because there is a transfer of ownership taking place there. So you don't just put down $1. You have to have a letter explaining that it is in fact a gift. And then it can be recorded in a public record. All right. And then we have legality of the object or purpose of the contract must be legal. It may not involve an illegal purpose or substance or object. Whatever you're selling or doing must be legal. You can't have a contract to perform an illegal act like murder. Yeah, I'm going to sue you because you didn't hold up your end of the contract and killed my spouse. Okay, because murder is illegal, right? So the contract cannot be against public policy or the law in order for it to be enforceable. You also can't have a contract that's legally enforceable by a court of law or by the police to buy drugs, to get a drug deal, right? Everybody understand these four essential elements? Here, I'm going to show you an example of that. I'm going to prove it to you. I love this episode. You guys will get a little laugh out of this one, maybe. All right, check this out.
What's the deal? What's going on?
Well, the lady owes me $20. I gave her a $20 and she didn't give me nothing.
Why does she owe you $20?
$20 bill. I gave her a $20 bill.
For what?
For anything. I don't care. Whatever it's for, but she can give me my money back if she ain't gonna do nothing with it.
Okay, were you planning to buy some drugs
Yes, I
or something?
was.
What kind of drugs were you wanting to buy?
Rock.
Rock.
Yes, I was.
You gave her $20 to buy.
I gave her $20. She gave me some plaster.
And now you want your $20 back
Yes, I do.
because she didn't supply you with crack cocaine.
So basically, she's trying to get the cop to enforce her contract with this drug dealer. She gave her $20 and it was supposed to be for cocaine, and instead she gave her plaster. Now, is that a legally enforceable contract? No, because the drugs are illegal. But anyway, this is
Well,
fun.
if she shouldn't give me nothing, no plaster or nothing, she should have said no.
What's going on?
She come around here a while ago. It used to be some people live right over there that used to sell.
Yeah.
We were sitting out here on the porch in some chairs. So she said, y'all have anything to buy? I said, no, baby, we don't have nothing to sell. So she left one around the corner. Then she come back 10 minutes later, holler, give me my money back up. No, you ain't bought nothing from here. And don't disrespect my child. This is my child. I don't sell crack. I'm a prostitute.
Did you guys hear that? Yeah. Don't disrespect my child. I don't sell crack. I'm a prostitute. Oh my God. Anyway,
What's the deal? What's going on?
so 4 essential elements of a valid contract. I don't know. You guys aren't laughing. You guys didn't think that was funny. Anyway, there's 4 essential elements to a valid contract. What are they? Competent parties, offer and acceptance, consideration, and legality of the object or purpose. And what are the 3 legal forms of consideration? Legal tender, exchange of value, and love and affection. You need to know both of those. What are the 4 essential elements, and what are the 3 legal forms of consideration? And what is the parole evidence rule? Well, how about this? Our contracts, just general contracts, could be I'm selling you my bicycle. Can we have a legal, valid, enforceable contract to sell my bicycle to you that's verbal?
Yes.
So don't you have to exchange the money for it to be a contract?
Yeah, but well, there has to be something in exchange. But can we have a verbal agreement? The contract for the terms of that sale are verbal?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a little bit harder to prove, but they, if you have witnesses and stuff, yeah, they're perfectly legal. And written contracts are illegal as well. But let's just say that one person has a verbal contract, a verbal agreement, and another one has it in writing. And if both of these go to court and it becomes an argument, who did you sell the bike to? Yeah, but I had a contract with you too. You told me. We get arguments like this in court, right? People sue people over what they said. And then they said, yeah, but I sold the bike to them and they got a contract in writing here. Where's your contract? Oh, you don't have a contract in writing? The court will kick that out of court in favor of the one who has the contract in writing. This is called the parole evidence rule, because the other person has evidence, you do not. Okay, so that's what the parole evidence rule is. Written contracts take precedence over oral agreements or promises. Okay, so once again, here we go. Here's my explanation of that. Purchase or lease contracts must always be in writing if a real estate agent is involved. Contracts must always be in writing for the sale of real estate, even if a real estate agent's not involved. But leases between private parties with no licensee involved can be verbal agreements, depending how long they are. That's a little tip. We're going to get into that. Okay. So contracts for the sale of real estate must always be in writing. no matter if a real estate agent's involved or not. However, contracts to lease real estate, if a real estate agent's involved, it needs to be in writing, because any contract we prepare according to the Real Estate Commission's rules has to be in writing. However, if you have two private parties amongst each other, they could enter into a lease agreement. It's not a wise thing to do, because how do you prove it, especially if somebody broke the terms of your lease agreement? How do you prove it if it was all verbal? Right? So it's not a wise thing to do. So we'll get into that, I guess, coming up. I'm jumping the gun a little bit. But let's first look at these terms here, amendments and addenda. What is an amendment and what is an addenda on page 196? All right, anytime a contract is modified, those changes must be agreed to in writing by both parties unless the contract, otherwise the contract is void. You can't have somebody change a contract, one person make changes to a contract without the other signing off on the approval of that. Both parties need to agree to the contract. So after you agree to a contract, one party can't go and make modifications on their own unless the other agrees to those changes. You follow? So licensees must not make changes or additions to the contract after both parties have signed it. This would be the unauthorized practice of law without a license, and it would also void the contract. Should also write that in there. And would also void the contract. Okay. Now, an amendment has the word mend in amendment, and addendum has the word add in addendum. So what does it mean to mend something? You ever rip your clothes and you had to, you rip your pants and you had to mend it, or your shirt had a little tear in it, you had to mend it? But you're sewing it, you're fixing it, you're repairing it, right? So when it comes to contracts, when you mend a contract, you're making a change to it. And any change voids the contract unless both parties initial or sign next to that change, agreeing to the modification. Addendum has the word add in it. This is anytime you're adding something to a contract, adding wording to a contract. It must be done before both parties signed it. Otherwise, once again, we're practicing law without a license. Once it's been signed by both parties, we cannot make amendments or additions to a contract after it's been signed by both parties. Otherwise, we're practicing law without a license. So make sure you make those changes beforehand. We could do that by going back and forth with the parties with what's known as a non-legally binding term sheet, where we put out all the terms that are to be added to the contract, and we go back and forth between the parties on this non-legally binding term sheet. And then once both parties agree to all the terms, write the contract once with all the agreed upon terms. Don't write the contract, have both parties sign it, and then try to make modifications to the contract. That's practicing law without a license. So let's highlight that here in the book, and we could write that in the margin here. Here's my arrow. This is what I have written here in the margin. This is what my chicken scratch says. Okay. Licensees must not make changes or additions to the contract after both parties signed it. This is practicing law without a license. You guys can change this wording and shorten it if you like. If only one party signed and there is a change, all parties must initial and sign and date next to each modification. Otherwise, you voided the contract. So let's highlight here on 196. An amendment is a change used by the signing parties to correct or clarify something in the contract. The changes must be dated and signed by all parties. An addendum is a separate document, sometimes called a rider, that alerts the terms of the original it alters the terms of the original contract. You're either amending a contract or you're adding something to it. Some examples of an addendum would be HOA documents, disclosures, updates to the terms and modifications, clarifications, nullifications of a portion of the original agreement. Or here's another one. If the person who's purchasing the property is getting a loan through the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, or the VA, a separate addenda must be added to the contract that states if the house does not appraise for the purchase price, the buyer can get out of the contract without penalty. So federal law requires that addenda be added to the contract when the source of financing is an FHA or VA loan. But that's in a separate addendum that's being added to the contract. Okay. Let me know when you guys have these notes and I can change the slide. Everybody got that? You're still writing.
Got it.
I got it.
Okay. So real estate licensees, that's us, we follow both contract law, general contract law, as well as real estate licensing laws. And the Real Estate Commission rules state that for us to be entitled to a commission, a real estate broker cannot be paid unless we had some sort of an authorization in writing by our client or customer that says they hired us and would be entitled to a commission. And these agreements can be in the form of a brokerage service agreement, a listing agreement, exclusive buyer's agency agreement, or a designated agency, transaction broker, or a referral agreement. Now, it has to be signed by the consumer. And anytime we sign a contract with a consumer, we must give them a duplicate original. This applies to sale and lease contracts, no matter who the broker is working for, whether they're representing the seller, buyer, landlord, or tenant. Now, the statute of frauds, not the first time we heard this. We heard this earlier in chapter 2 and 3. It talks, anytime you hear the term statute of frauds, it requires something to be in writing. And I believe in chapter 2 and 3, we heard about it pertaining to items having to be in writing according to the statute of frauds. Now we're going to learn a little bit, something a little bit different about the statute of frauds, still pertaining to contracts being in writing. It says sales contracts for real estate must always be in writing, whether there's a real estate agent involved or not. However, leases must be in writing if they're 3 or more years. However, if a licensee is involved, it doesn't matter the length. All contracts with real estate licensees have to be in writing. So if you have a contract with two private individuals, a buyer, seller, or the landlord and a tenant, I'm sorry, not a buyer, seller, landlord or a tenant, because contracts for sale have to always be in writing, whether a real estate's involved, agent's involved or not. But leases, if a real estate agent's not involved, it's just between two private parties. They can have verbal contracts, verbal agreements to rent you their property. It's not a wise thing to do, though, because how do you prove what all the terms were of the lease? When's the rent due? How much is the rent? What are the conditions of the lease term? How long is it for? You know, all of that stuff. How are you going to prove it if you don't got it in writing? So it's extremely risky to rely on oral agreements. So leases can be recorded if they're 2 or more years in length. Okay, so we need to know this for exams. All in New Jersey, all contracts for sale must be in writing. Leases must be in writing if a real estate agent's involved. If not, leases can be verbal agreements, but they must be in writing if they're 3 or more years. And those leases can be recorded in the public record if they're 2 or more years in length. If you wanted to record your long-term interest in that property. That's why we record documents in the public record, right? To put the world on notice of our interest in that property. I'll give you one example of a guy who I'm sure has recorded his interest in the public record. If you guys are familiar where the ShopRite is in Edison on Route 1 there, that is, you got the ShopRite as the anchor store, but there's a lot of stores there. It's a shopping center. All the stores in that shopping center are rented by one individual. And he has an agreement with the owner that he can sublease. So now this way the owner doesn't have to worry about dealing with tenants at all. He's got one tenant to deal with who rents all the units. And so he knows that the rent for all of them needs to be paid every month. He's got a long-term lease with them. And then that guy writes individual leases with tenants and he sublets to other tenants. He would want to record his long-term lease agreement for the whole shopping center in the public record. Because if that current owner of the property dies and his heirs get it, you don't want them coming in saying, oh, you're not allowed to sublease, or you're, try to change the terms because he's recorded it in the public record that he has an agreement, a long-term lease agreement on that property. All right. So this you need to know for exams. The statute of frauds says that contracts for sale must always be in writing. And if it's a lease, they only need to be in writing if it's 3 or more years, and they can be recorded if they're 2 or more. However, if a real estate agent's involved, it always needs to be in writing. Okay. So we see down here, real estate licensees always follow real estate laws, the New Jersey statutes, 4515, Title 45, Chapter 15, as well as the Real Estate Commission rules 11.5, the Administrative Code, Title 11, Chapter 5, that states we must always have contracts for sale or lease in writing, and licensed agents must never have verbal contracts. Did you get it? I'm sorry. I saw somebody trying to take a picture. Did you get it? And put it back there for you if you want. Good. Okay. So New Jersey statute of frauds, here you go, page 196, states that contracts for the sale of real estate and any lease more than 3 years must be in writing and signed in order to be enforceable. I want you to write beneath that, leases longer than 2 years can be recorded. So highlight that about sales contracts and leases, but also add their leases longer than 2 years can be recorded. Leases longer than 2 years can be recorded. All right. Now, contracts can be express or implied, unilateral or bilateral, executory or executed, valid, unenforceable, voidable, or void. We're going to learn what all those terms mean now. Let's first do the highlights of them. Highlights and underlines, and write this little thing down here. And then we'll go to the next slide, my custom slide, which will then explain it. Okay, so just do the highlights as highlighted here. In an express contract, the parties state the terms and show their intentions in words. An implied contract is demonstrated by their acts and conduct. Bilateral contract, both parties promise to do something. And the litmus test to determine if it's a bilateral contract is this statement: I will do this and you will do that. Okay. And in a unilateral contract is a one-sided agreement whereby one party makes a promise to induce a second party to do something. The second party is not legally obligated to act. However, if the second party does comply, the first party is obligated to keep the promise. Party, party, party. Got your head spinning yet from reading that explanation? I'll have a simpler one on the next slide. But you should write down this litmus test for a unilateral contract. I will do this if you will do that. Okay. And let me know when you guys have all this, and we'll move on to the next slide and we'll go over the explanation. I'm throwing out there the after lunch attendance poll now too. If you have a problem, you can't see it, say something now. If you cannot see the poll, say something now. There you go. Ooh, that thunder's rumbling out there. I don't know if you guys are getting it.
Yeah, there was a flash flooding not too long ago.
Oh, really? I know we had a little bit of rain over here, and but I'm hearing the thunder rumbling right now. Sounds like somebody's driving into my garage. Okay. Everybody got these highlights?
I have them.
Yes, I have them.
Okay. So, an express contract. Let's start out with express and implied contracts. Express contracts lay out all the terms, expressing them in words, leaving nothing to interpretation. So those words are usually put in writing. We express ourselves in writing. Leaves nothing to interpretation. However, an implied contract is expressed by one's actions rather than their words. It can leave room for interpretation and confusion. So an implied contract is demonstrated by acts and conducts of the individuals rather than their words. Therefore, it may leave some things to interpretation and cause confusion. Here are some examples of an implied contract. A lease expires. However, the landlord accepts the rent from the tenant. They didn't sign any new contracts, didn't put anything new in writing. But the actions of the landlord accepting your check and cashing it implies that they're okay with you remaining as a month-to-month tenant now. But what about the terms of the contract? Are they the same still? See, that's confusion because you didn't express it in writing, in words. It leaves things to interpretation. Here's another example of an implied contract. If a bank accepts a payment from an owner after the foreclosure process begins, this could be interpreted by courts that they've entered into some sort of an agreement between the lender and the owner for an alternate form of repayment for the outstanding balance to get caught up on their payments. So the payment would serve as the borrower's evidence for such a claim that they had an agreement to get caught up. So a judge would dismiss the foreclosure altogether. This is why, if you're behind on your mortgage payments, your lender will be calling you. Yeah, you missed the payment this month. Would you like to make that payment now over the phone? Could you make a payment today? Any kind of payment, even if less than the full amount? So you'd be getting those calls constantly. But at some point, they will stop. And even if you were to call the lender, they will not accept any payment from you whatsoever. Now you know you're in foreclosure. The foreclosure process has begun. Lenders will not accept any sort of a payment from you after they began the foreclosure process, because it could create an implied contract that you could use to get the foreclosure dismissed, and they would have to start all over again from scratch. So you guys understand what an express contract is versus an implied contract? Implied contract is expressed by one's actions, whereas an express contract is expressed by your words. It doesn't leave anything to interpretation. Now, unilateral contract versus a bilateral contract. A unilateral contract is where one party's required to do something, but only if the other party acts. But they're not required to. They have an option to. So any contract where one party has an obligation to perform and the other has an option is called an option agreement. And option agreements must be prepared by attorneys. Real estate agents cannot prepare option contracts, like a lease with an option to buy. We can't prepare those. That's unilateral contract. Only an attorney can prepare those. We can prepare a lease. We cannot prepare the option to buy. So a way to tell if it's a unilateral contract is this litmus test with this sentence. I will do this if you will do that. If that situation, if that statement applies to your situation, it's a unilateral contract. I'm going to do this, but only if you do that. It's an option. Now, bilateral contracts, both parties are required to do something. I'm going to do this, and you're going to do that. Like a sales contract. I'm going to pay you the money, and you're going to turn over the ownership to me. Right? Unilateral contract, lease with an option to buy. Well, I'm going to lease your property, and I have by a certain deadline to tell you if I'm going to go through with the purchase of your property at this predetermined price by a predetermined deadline. Am I required to go through with the purchase? No, I have an option to. So how those option agreements are set up, well, that's all dependent on how the contract is written by the attorney. Usually they'll write up something like you're going to pay additional rent in exchange for the option to buy. And if you don't end up exercising your option to buy, well, you don't get that money back. It's just applied as additional rent that the landlord gets to keep in exchange for them giving you that option, which is a contract. Remember, for a contract to be valid, there has to be something given of value in exchange. And it's not just you paying your regular rent. It has to be an addition. And contracts can be executed. Executed or executory is referring to the state, the status of the contract, more than the type of contract. An executed contract is one that had been signed. Has your client executed the contract? I'm asking if they signed it, right? This terminology is used all the time. All the time. So we now have a fully executed contract. What am I saying? Has it been signed by everybody? But the term fully executed could have another meaning to it. It could mean a contract where all the terms have been completely carried out and fulfilled and there's nothing left to be done. That's pertaining to the status of the contract. So the term executed means that the contract had been signed. Fully executed could mean that it was signed by everybody, or it could mean that all the terms and conditions within the contract have been completely fulfilled and carried out and there's nothing left to be done. And also pertaining to the status of the contract would be the term executory. I've never heard anybody use this in my life. Only in the book and on the exam. I've never heard an attorney use this either. But this is legal terminology here. Executory. Tory means in progress. So an executory contract is one where all the terms have not yet been fulfilled. All the conditions have not been carried out. There's still something that needs to be done. So, has your client executed the contract yet? Great. So we have a fully executed contract. So, what status is that contract in now? It's an executory contract because we just had everybody sign it. However, none of the terms of the contract have yet been fulfilled. The inspections, the appraisals, or any of the surveys, or any of that, right? We need to do all that stuff now that the contract required of us to do. So the contract's in executory status. Now, once everything, all the conditions of the contract have been fulfilled and carried out, and nothing is left to be done, the contract's been fully executed. And that's not until you get to the closing table. Right? Listen, for exams, don't sweat it. Just know executed and fully executed have to deal with signing. I don't think they're going to ask you about the status of a contract. So don't sweat that. Just know the term executed has to means the contract's been signed. Fully executed, been signed by everybody. That's probably all you need to know for your exams. Okay? So here we got it on page 197 and 198. An executed contract can be signed contract. A fully executed contract would be one that's signed by all parties. That's all you really need to know for exams. Even though I got this all circled up here, explaining what the status of a contract is, I don't think you need to know that for exams. I've never heard anybody talk about the status of a contract using the term fully executed or executory. Never even heard an attorney use it. But last time they used it was probably in law school or when they're chumming it up with their other attorney buddies in their conventions, but I doubt they're doing that either. So now we're going to talk about validity of contracts. What is a valid contract a void contract, a voidable contract, and an unenforceable contract. So a valid contract is one that has the four essential elements. What are the four essential elements? What are the four essential elements of a valid contract? I'll start you out. Competent parties.
Offer and acceptance, consideration, and legality of object.
There you go. So if a contract has all four of those elements, the contract is valid and fully enforceable in a court of law. All right. Let's just highlight these things and we'll go over the explanation on the next slide. Apparently I got a next slide. I got a note for myself there at the top. So we'll just go over them. So just highlight what's highlighted here and then we'll go to the next slide because I put them in a little bit of different order when I like to explain them. I don't like to explain them in this order. Everybody got those highlights? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
All right. So a valid contract, here's my slide for it. And it's a neater note and a better explanation. Not a bad one to get a screenshot of. Valid contract has all the four essential elements. Voidable contract is one that can be disaffirmed by one of the parties. It may be missing one of the essential elements, like a contract with a minor. Remember, they're not of legal age, so they're not a competent party. Although for exam purposes and exam purposes only, if they're a married minor, they are considered an adult and the contract is considered fully enforceable. If one party is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they're not a competent party. You cannot enforce a contract against somebody who was stoned or drunk when they signed the contract. They weren't competent. They didn't know what they were doing. That could always be brought up, right? Or if they're not of sound mind, they have a mental disease or defect or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. That's not of sound mind, right? If you have Alzheimer's or dementia, or you're insane, can I legally enforce a contract that you signed? No. Or if they're being taken advantage of, undue influence is the legal term for that. Undue influence, you're being taken advantage of. Or duress, that's by force or intimidation. Undue influence. Never have anybody sign a contract when they're in the hospital about to get a surgery that they may not pull through on. Those contracts can always be argued against in a court of law. Don't go to somebody's hospital bedside before they're about to get heart surgery or something like that to sign a contract. I would say they're not in a mental state right now. That could be argued and overturned in the court of law. All right. Unenforceable contracts are a contract that neither party can sue to force performance. However, if they both wish to remain in the contract, it would still be valid, what's called valid between the parties. Let me further explain. Let's say you and I, we're chilling, we're drinking, we're both getting kind of, drunk, 3 sheets to the wind, right? And we're both drunk. And we were having a conversation, and I'm like, you got a beautiful house here. You're like, yeah, I'm thinking about getting out of Jersey. I don't like to sell it. I'd like to buy a house. How much you want for it? We get into this conversation, and I'm like, I'll buy your house. And so we write a contract, and for me to purchase your house. We're both drunk. Neither one of us are a competent party. So neither one of us can sue the other if we don't keep our end of the bargain. That makes sense, right? However, if we both sober up and you still want to sell your house to me and I still want to buy it, the contract, we could still carry out all the terms of the contract. It would be valid between the parties. It would be valid between both of us. However, neither one of us could sue the other because they breached the contract in any way. Because we were both drunk when we really signed it anyway, so it's unenforceable. Now, the proper thing to do is when we sober up, read up a new contract and sign it again when we're both sane, sober adults, competent parties. Then it could be fully enforceable and valid. A void contract is a contradictory term in itself because a void contract is not a contract at all. Probably because it's missing one of the 4 essential elements, or it had already been canceled. That's what a void contract is. It cannot be enforced by either party because it's already been canceled, or it is illegal to begin with because it's missing one of those essential elements. Would we lose? All right, so there you go. Valid, voidable, unenforceable, and void. A contract with a minor is the usual example they give on exams as a voidable contract. Who could void the contract? If you have a contract with a minor,
Sure.
the minor can, because they're not a competent party. The adult cannot. It could still be enforced against the adult who signed. So it's not very bright for an adult to enter into a contract with a minor, because the minor can enforce a contract against an adult because they're a competent party, but an adult cannot enforce a contract with a minor. I've been looking for a video to put here to show you an example of this in a court of law, and I can't seem to find it. It's an old Judge Judy episode. You guys ever watch Judge Judy? It's an old Judge Judy episode where you had a teenager who bought a motorcycle from a used car dealer. It was like one of those off-road bikes, so he went to an agreement. He has to make payments to him. He signed a contract to buy the off-road motorcycle from the dealer, and he took it out, beat on it a little bit, took it for a ride. And then he decided he don't want it no more and brought it back and just left it there. So the car dealer took him to court, trying to, says, hey, look, I got a contract here. This is what happened. This is everything. And then Judge Judy says, so is that what happened, young man? He goes like this. I even remember the episode. He just shrugged his shoulders. He didn't even say nothing. And she said, use your words, use your voice. What is this? What is this? You know how Judge Judy is, right? And so he's like, yeah. And so everything he said is accurate, right? Yes. So why did you return the bike? I don't want it no more. She slams her gavel and goes, case dismissed. And the dealer's like, what the hell just happened? I thought I just proved my case. He even agreed to everything I just said. And, Judge Judy grabbed her gavel and her book. She started walking out. And then she saw him like freaking out like that. So she turned around, walked back. And she's like, what's the matter? He's like, what just happened? He's like, you just agreed to everything I just said and backing up my story. And she said, well, you sign a contract with somebody, you take them to court, right? You had a contract with him. Yeah, that's true. But he's a minor. He couldn't even show up in court today without his legal guardian, his parent. So I can't enforce a contract against the minor. He said he wanted out of it. He's out of it. He's not a competent party. Did you have his mother sign the contract with him? If you did, then there's something we could do. Then we could enforce that contract because she's an adult. But if you did not, and you only signed a contract with a minor, there's nothing I could do in the eyes of the law. He's not a competent party. There's nothing you could do. So you learned a very valuable lesson today. Bye-bye. That's exactly how she acted. That's exactly how she talked in the courtroom. I'd love to find that episode. I've been scouring the internet. I can't find the damn episode, but it's a perfect example. I remember the case vividly. It's a perfect example to prove this point of a contract cannot be enforced against a minor. Unless they're married, right? At least that's only for exams. All right. So that's valid, voidable, unenforceable, void, undue influence, duress. We also learned about the 4 essential elements of a valid contract. We learned about the 3 legal forms of consideration. We learned about the parole evidence rule. We learned about we learned a lot. Okay. We learned about the statute of frauds, that all contracts for sale must be in writing, and leases, they only need to be in writing if they're 3 or more years, or if a real estate agent's involved, and they can be recorded if they're 2 or more years. What else did we learn? We learned about the terms amendments and addenda. We learned that contracts can be express or implied, unilateral or bilateral, and we learned that executory and executed contract is a signed contract. A fully executed contract is one that's signed by everybody. You see, there's a lot of stuff to know here already in this chapter. And now we learned about valid, void, unenforceable, void, undue influence, and duress. Told you a lot of questions could come from this terms in this chapter alone. All right. So if you didn't highlight it yet, here's the place to highlight duress and undue influence on page 198. Undue influence and duress. Under duress is force. Undue influence means you're taken advantage of. And those contracts are voidable. They may be canceled by the person itself or the court. Extreme care should be taken when one or more parties to a contract is elderly, sick, or in great distress, or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. To be valid, every contract must be signed as the free and voluntary act of each party. So, what do you do? I'll give you an example of a couple situations I found myself in before. What do you do if you sign a contract, a listing contract, with an older lady who seems like she's sharp as a tack? She asks all the right questions. She's spot on with everything. And she decides she's going to list her property with you. After interviewing with several brokers, she decides she's going to list her property for sale with you. And then you get a call a couple days later after you entered the listing in the MLS. It's out there. You get a call from somebody that says, yeah, are you this person? Okay, I was at my mother's house and she was interviewing brokers and she had a bunch of real estate paperwork on her table. And she told me that she listed her property for sale with you. My mom's not selling her property. She's not listing it for sale with you. My mom's got, I forget if it was Alzheimer's or dementia she said she had. And she said, and I'm her legal guardian. She's not selling the property. So what do I do now? What do I do at this point? What would you do at this point?
Can you ask for proof?
So you need to verify that she's got dementia.
Well, even if she does have dementia.
Well, if she has dementia, then she's not of sound mind. So then it's voidable. But if the person who's saying they're their legal guardian is not telling the truth, then it's not voidable.
Yeah, I don't know who this lady is that's calling me right now. She's not necessarily even the daughter. It could be another real estate agent, trying to pull some kind of nonsense. Or maybe it is the real daughter, but she doesn't want her mom to sell the house. I don't know. I don't know anything at this point. I'm going to need some sort of a proof. So I told her, oh, okay, it happens. There's no problem. I could cancel the contract, but I'm going to need you to come down here and bring some paperwork that shows that you're the legal guardian appointed by the court to handle your mom's issues. And I'm going to need you to sign the contract to cancel the listing. Otherwise, I have no idea who you are, and I'm going to have to keep looking out for my client's best interest and marketing the property for sale up until you can do that. So she came down to my office. She brought the paperwork. I had her sign the cancellation of the listing, and there was nothing I could do. Now, the lady seemed like she was perfectly lucid when I interviewed with her. So the next time I met with an older gentleman. He was very shaky, but look, older people sometimes they get kind of shaky, Don't hold that against them. Don't discriminate against people because they're old. Okay, respect your elders, So when I was taking the listing from him, I just asked him a question, and while we were there signing the paperwork, I said, "Is there anybody else that needs to be here with us today signing the contracts?" And he was like, "Oh, thank you for reminding me. Oh, I forgot. Oh, yeah, my son. He's like, let me call him. He just lives around the corner, and he'll come right over. Oh, thank you. And he called his son up, and the son came over, signed the contracts. They did want to sell the property, and his father was starting to lose it a little bit upstairs. So he signed his son on as the legal guardian that needed to sign contracts with him. And he even made a comment to me while he was calling his son. He was like, you know how it gets. He's like, when you're young, you take care of them, and as you get older, they got to take care of you. He's like, I was like, I understand. And he came over, and we got the listing, and I sold the property, and everything was good. So I was like, all right, I know how to approach this now. Look, keep in mind, every time you talk to somebody that may not be of sound mind, they're got Alzheimer's or dementia, they may not know that they have kids, they may not know what year they're in. They sound like they're perfectly lucid to you and answering all your questions, sharp as a tack, but they're not there, all there upstairs, So this is not an absolute test of whether somebody's a competent party or not. But I have found that it works, that if you ask them, sometimes it may trigger them to remember. Sometimes it may not. Okay, just be aware of that. And there's nothing you could do if they're not a competent party. There's nothing you could do to force them to be in a contract with you. Sometimes it happens. So next time I had an older lady that I was dealing with, and I was there for the listing, and I asked her, I said, "Is there anybody else that needs to be signing contracts with us here today?" And she's like, "No, I'm the only owner. I told you that on the phone when you asked me to make sure all the owners are here that need to sign the documents." I was like, "Oh, okay, I was just following up. I just want to make sure that there's nobody else that needs to be signing contracts with us today." And she's like, "What are you trying to say?" Like, she was kind of sharp. She knew what I was getting at, that I was asking if she had a legal guardian or something. And she actually kept like hammering me on that a little bit, like trying to like corner me. I'm trying to say that she may not be of sound mind. And I was like, no, I just want to know if there's anybody else that needs to sign contracts with us here today. Maybe there is somebody else. I don't know. I just want to clarify, double check. And she was like, she gave me one of those. Hey, that's fine. I was respectful to her. I asked the question because hey, better ask than not. And so I asked the question. She caught it. She was perfectly fine, lucid. Not her cheese wasn't sliding off her cracker, so to speak.
So
So
is it best to just keep deflecting, like in those scenarios, like to just keep
yeah,
deflecting the question?
yeah,
Or
you really don't want to insult her and be like, well, you're kind of older and you're kind of shaky. I just wanted to, make sure that you don't have a legal guardian because you got dementia or Alzheimer's or something. Your cheese is sliding off your proverbial cracker. I mean, it comes across as insulting, and yeah. So you deflect a little bit. Be polite about it. That's what I was just checking. I just wanted to make sure. You know. It's all innocent, come across innocent, you know. And even though she was like, yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, I was like, it's okay. You gotta just go with it, just roll with it. But
got it. Thank you.
you gotta do something though. You gotta ask at least, right? Now, I usually know in advance anyway, because I I do a tax record search before I ever go to your house to confirm that you're the only owner or not. And sometimes I go to people's houses to get a listing, and I'm meeting with one person, and I see that why are there three people listed here as the owner, or two people listed as the owner? Oh, well, that was someone who died or whatever. Oh, okay. Well, that brings up another question then. Uh, did they leave their property to you? Oh, it was my spouse. Oh, okay. So do you have uh, the death records and marriage certificate? I'm going to need to see those. Uh, Otherwise, I don't know who this other person was, and taking a listing from you, this could be another owner that they died. They could have left their interest to somebody else. I need to make sure that you're the authorized person to sell the real estate on your own now, that they left their interest to you. And if it was your spouse, I need to see that they were your spouse by seeing a marriage certificate and death certificate showing that you are the one now. Because you didn't change it out of their name yet. It's still in both of your names. So you could get to it like that. All right, let's see some additional contractual issues. We're going to go over performance of a contract and learn that dates are merely guidelines that are to be followed. Courts have determined that dates in contracts are merely guidelines to be followed, and anybody that misses a date in a contract to perform some act is not in breach of contract. So we're going to learn about the phrase time is of the essence, and we're going to learn about different ways to discharge a contract. We're going to learn about default or breach of contract and statute of limitations. I think we're going to start with statute of limitations. So what is a statute of limitations? The best way to describe it is it's a time limit in which one has a right to assert their legal rights. And there's a 6 years is a statute of limitation for contracts, foreclosures, mortgages, and cases of fraud. And there's a 10-year statute of limitations to recover real property in New Jersey. I got a little note here for you too. How long do brokers need to keep all records for, listing agreements and such?
6 years.
6 years.
Is that just a coincidence? Lawsuits for contracts are also 6 years? What a coincidence, huh? So let's highlight here on 198 that New Jersey generally allows a 6 years which time parties to a contract can seek court action to enforce their rights. This continues on to page 199. The 6-year period applies to contracts, foreclosures, mortgages, and cases of fraud. Lawsuits to recover real property have a 10-year statute of limitations in New Jersey. I hope we don't lose our connection here. Now, lightning, I didn't see the lightning yet, but thunder's getting pretty loud. All right. So what is the statute of limitations and the time periods for statute of limitations? Probably get a question on exams on that, hint, hint. Ooh. That storm is a-coming. In the event we do get disconnected because of a storm, let's try to reconnect and hook up again. I'll try to restart and see if we can get it connected. We'll wait a little while, try to connect again. And if it's not possible, then just finish off the chapter, watching the recordings that you have there. And then we'll get the time later, made up. Okay. Actually, we'll have the time made up anyway because we're adding time to this class. But you could get the content done by finishing up the chapter by watching the video and getting your highlights and stuff done in case we get disconnected, okay? All right, everybody good here? Everybody got their highlights and their notes?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So breach of contract or defaults is when someone breaks the contractual agreement without having a good legal excuse to do so, in a nutshell. They could be held liable to the other party. And dates in contracts are merely guidelines, and nobody's considered in breach of contract if a date is missed to perform some act stated in the contract. Whether it's the buyer having to produce the mortgage commitment letter, or it's the buyer having to get the home inspection done, or whatever. So sometimes, however, we want those dates to mean something, to have teeth to them, you know? And if that's the case, we could issue, or it's wise if you leave attorneys to issue this notice. Ask, what I usually do, I don't issue a time of the essence order. I'll ask an attorney to do it. A time of the essence means it's up, very important. Time is very important. So this is a strict deadline that must be met. And any party who has not performed on time is guilty of breach of contract if they miss that deadline in the time of the essence order. So this term should be strictly left to attorneys to use. And you got to use caution because it can be a double-edged sword, meaning it cuts both ways. So for example, here's where we usually issue a time of the essence order, but it could be used in other occasions too. Here's where we most commonly use it in residential transactions. When somebody's buying real estate, in the contract, they're supposed to produce a mortgage commitment letter. I explained to you guys already what a pre-approval and a pre-qualification letter is. Which one's better? Mortgage pre-qualification or mortgage pre-approval? It's the pre-approval. Okay, and why? Because a mortgage pre-qualification letter, you just tell the mortgage rep, the mortgage solicitor, your social security number so they can run your credit, and you tell them how much money you make and what your long-term debts are, and none of that has been verified. And they issue a mortgage pre-qualification letter. However, to get a mortgage pre-approval letter, they need to verify. So they're going to need to see your pay stubs, your bank statements, your tax returns to verify your finances. And then they issue a mortgage a mortgage approval, pre-approval letter. And that pre-approval letter is contingent upon you not changing your job, nothing changing in your financial situation, and you buying the house that the taxes are under a certain amount and the value is under a certain. Okay. Now, the next step is to get a mortgage commitment letter from the lender. In order to get a mortgage commitment letter, now they need to verify information about the property you're buying. So they need to get an appraisal of the property and at minimum, a wood-destroying insect report to show that the house isn't overrun by termites and it's about to collapse, you know? So once that information is produced, in addition to all your finances, etc., evidence, it goes to the underwriter at the lending institution, and the underwriter, through the process of underwriting, that's the process of them analyzing your risk to the lender. So they verify all your bank statements, your pay stubs, all your financial information, and the information about the house. They get an appraisal. They want to see a copy of the wood destroying insect report at minimum, or the home inspection report if you have it. And then the underwriter determines whether they're going to commit to giving you the loan or not now. And when they do, they issue a commitment letter. All right. And this usually needs to be produced within about 30 days after the date of the contract. So we need to be aware of that. If we're the ones that are writing the contract, representing the buyer, it's our job to make sure that that buyer provides everything that's necessary to their lender to get that commitment letter. And then we need to forward that commitment letter to the sellers by that deadline, by that date in the contract. That's a guideline, not a deadline. Ooh. Thunder's shaking my house now. I don't know where you guys are, if you guys are even affected by it, but I could feel it. All right, so if what date comes and goes and they didn't produce the mortgage commitment letter yet, I'm the listing agent. I'm going to call up that buyer's agent. I'm going to be like, hey, I didn't see any emails or faxes or anything with the commitment letter. Is there any problem with that? Or did you just forget to send it on over? You know, and if you're the buyer's agent, you call up and you say, oh yeah, you know what? I don't think we got it yet. Let me call up the lender and see what's up. Let me get that for you, and I'll get back to you. Day goes by, 2 days go by. Yo, what's up with that commitment letter? Oh yeah. You know, I reached out to them, but let me check my emails and stuff. I don't know if they sent it to me yet. Let me follow up on that for you. Another day goes by. Another day goes by. What's going on with that commitment letter? Yeah, they were supposed to send it to me already. Let me call them up again. All right, you do that. I'm going to call up the seller's attorney now, and I'm going to say, hey, listen, I think they're jacking us around here. I think they may be having a problem getting the loan. I keep asking for the mortgage commitment letter, and they're not producing it. I need you to issue a time of the essence order for that commitment letter. So the attorney will then issue a time of the essence order. They'll probably give them like another 10 days to come up with it. And if you don't come up with that mortgage commitment letter within that 10 days, the contract is canceled. That's a strict deadline. You have 10 days to come up with it or the deal's dead. That's sufficient time. Now, let's just say the 10th day rolls around. They didn't produce it yet. Contract's dead. The 11th day, oh, we got the commitment letter. Contract's already killed. Can they put it back together though? Yeah, they can. But the other side doesn't need to agree to put it back together exactly the way it was. Remember the work that you didn't want to do after the inspection? well, we get that commitment letter now. We can put the contract back together and move forward. But you know what? We want to insist that the seller fixes this or thing that they didn't agree to before. Otherwise, you're going to have to put the property, if you want to kill the deal, you're going to have to put the property back on the market, start showing it all over again, hope for another buyer to write a contract and start all over again. You see how it's a double-edged sword and it could cut both ways? Okay. So that's a risk you take when issuing a time of the essence order. But you know what? It's better to order it because if they're not able to produce it, that's an indication they may not be able to get the loan. Let's not keep the property off the market, hoping that this person will show up with the commitment letter, and they may not. So we'll give them 10 days to produce it, and if they can't come up with it, then the deal's going to be dead. We could put it back on the market, and that buyer was in breach of contract. Okay? Because they're telling us that there's no problem, that they can get it, but they're not producing it. Now, not able to get a mortgage loan is not a breach of contract. But if you keep saying that you got it or you can get it and then you don't, that's a problem. That's not being honest with all parties involved. So what is a strict deadline in contract that must be met? Otherwise, the parties are in breach of contract. Time is of the essence. And what do you call it when one of the parties breaks the terms of the contract but doesn't have a good legal excuse to do so?
Breach of contract.
Breach of contract or default. They defaulted on the contract or breach of contract. So 2 more terms for us here. So let's highlight the definition on page 199 for time is of the essence. Okay, everybody got that?
Yes.
Got it.
All right. So assignments or assuming a contract is when one party assigns their contractual obligations to someone else to take them over. Now, most contracts for real estate do not allow this. But if they did, the original person to the contract is never relieved of their original obligation. They'd always hold primary responsibility in event that the assignee breaches the contract. An example of this would be subleasing. Most landlords don't allow sublease. They signed a lease with you as the tenant. They don't want you subleasing to other people that they don't even know. So subleasing is usually written into the contract that it's not permitted. It would need the owners, the landlords, specific written permission to allow it. Now, let's just say they did allow it. And you're renting from the landlord, and then you sublease to another tenant. If they don't pay the rent or they break one of the other terms of your lease agreement. You still hold primary responsibility to pay that rent. You're never relieved of that obligation because you got another agreement with another tenant who's subleasing. Yeah, but the landlord didn't sign an agreement with them. They signed it with you. You never give up that primary responsibility. Okay? Now, novation. I do not like the book's definition for this. You guys may want to snap a picture of this slide for my definition. Novation of the contract or novation of the parties. So when you assign a contract to someone else, you never give up primary responsibility. However, there may be times where you assign a contract to someone else and you don't want to have any further future liability. There is a way that could occur if you novate the contract. Novation is substituting the existing contract with a new agreement, so the older contract has no legal force anymore because it was replaced with a new one. Now, you could either replace the contract entirely with a new agreement, that's novation, or you can novate the parties. Novation of the parties is when you substitute a person named in the contract with a new person, and the original person named in the contract has no further legal obligation or liability. Okay, so novation of the parties is similar to novation. However, instead of replacing the entire contract, we're just substituting the parties named in the contract. The original person has no further liability. They're no longer bound to the contract because they've been legally replaced by another person and relieved of any further obligation. That's what novation is. You will always get novation on exams. And you need to understand what assignment is. And that when you assign a contract, the original parties to the contract never give up their primary obligation.
I have a question.
You shoot it.
What if one of the parties breaches the contract and then a novation happens, but you don't find out that they breached the contract until after the novation? Are they still legally liable?
Wait, say what?
What if one of the parties breaches the contract and then they're replaced, but you don't find out until that party breached the contract until after the novation happened? I don't know a specific example, but just in general.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody breaks a contract, then they're liable. Yeah, I don't know about the what if scenarios. Don't start looking too deep into these things for what if scenarios that you may not get on exams. Okay, wait to see if they actually give you a question on exams pertaining to stuff like that, which they won't. Okay, because that's getting really into legal nitty gritty. But the thing is, if somebody violated the terms of the contract, and now they're trying to novate the contract so someone else takes over their liability, you can't do that. That would be fraud on your part. You know, that's like I was just watching something about legal protections of your assets. How do you protect your assets from somebody? Let's just say somebody's suing you, and you want to now hide your assets because you know they're going to win the case, and you want to hide your assets so they can't see your assets and what you own. Okay, well, that's actually an illegal act in its own. By doing that, you're trying to deceive the court. And if you do move those assets, courts can order that reversed and that money be put back to the accounts that you had it in that were under your name instead of under some LLC or other way that you're trying to hide it somewhere else in a trust somewhere or something. Because you're trying to deceive the courts and you're trying to deceive the person. That's actually illegal to do. And it can be reversed. That's the kind of same scenario that you're given here with the somebody breaks the terms of a contract and now they're going to novate it to try to push those obligations onto someone else. That's not legally copacetic. Let's put it that way. All right. Yeah, that could be undone, even if it was somebody did try doing that. Yeah, that would be illegal. Okay. Oh, lost somebody else. All right, so understand novation and assignment. Which one are they legally relieved of their obligations? Novation. In assignment, you're never relieved. You always hold primary responsibility. So let's highlight them now in the book. The definition for novation here. Let's see if they improved it at all in this version of the book, but there was always a crappy definition. Novation is the substitution of a new contract for an existing agreement, weirdly worded. New agreement may be between the same parties or a new party may be substituted for either. This is novation of the parties. Okay, the definition is getting better than what it used to be. It's a little weird wording, but it's still, it's all right. It serves the purpose, I guess. In the case of novation, the old contract holds no legal force. Okay. The old contract no longer has any force. Means it's not legally enforceable. Okay. So the definition's a lot better than it used to be. Still not the greatest, but a lot better than it used to be. Now, when everybody got those highlights?
1 second.
Sure thing.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome. So, different ways a contract can be discharged. The contract may be completely performed with all of the terms carried out, or it may be breached or broken if one of the parties defaults. In addition, there's various other methods which contracts can be discharged. So we just need to understand them. You don't need to study this for exams. You just need to understand how contracts can be discharged, okay? Partial performance. That's when the parties only partially perform their legal obligations, their promises within the contract. They didn't do everything the contract required of them to do. Yeah, they broke the terms of the contract. Substantial performance. Let's just say they did everything the contract required them to do, but they didn't do it exactly the way the contract may have specified that they needed to do it in a certain way. That's substantial performance. Impossibility of performance is when the terms of the contract cannot be legally accomplished. And I give an example here. They're not able to get a permit to use the property for the intended purpose, or they're unable to get a certificate of occupancy due to its condition, or some other legal condition cannot be met. It makes it impossible to perform and carry out the terms of the contract. Mutual agreement. Both parties can just mutually back out and cancel the contract. In that case, nobody's in breach, but the contract's discharged. Or by operation of law, like voiding a contract as a result of fraud, a contract with a minor, or expiration of a statute of limitations, or contracts being altered without all the parties agreeing to those altered terms. Remember, consent for any changes for a contract is required. All right, so what happens now? Now that we know the different ways contracts can be discharged, let's go over if a seller defaults, what can the buyer do? And if a buyer defaults, what can the seller do? But before we do that, let's revisit this word injunction. We went over this in chapter 3, I think. It's when a judge orders somebody to do something or to refrain from doing something. When the judge orders someone to act, well, actually, that was chapter 4. When a judge orders somebody to take action or refrain from taking action. Okay? So if a seller defaults, what can the buyer do? Well, let's go over these 3 options. The buyer can rescind the contract. That means they could cancel the contract and recover their earnest money deposits, any good faith deposit money they put down. If the seller defaults, the buyer can sue the seller. The lawsuit is called specific performance, which would force the seller to carry out the terms of the contract as they agreed to in the contract. In other words, if you have a seller and they get to the closing table and then they're like, hey, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm not selling. Where does that leave the buyer? I mean, they put all that money in. They did inspections, appraisals. They had title searches and surveys and got insurance, and they put a lot of time, money, and effort into that. And maybe they got all their stuff in a moving truck ready to move in after this closing today. And now you're like, changed my mind. No. In this kind of an instance, a buyer could definitely force a seller to perform as they agreed to in the contract. It's called a suit for specific performance. You're suing them specifically to perform the contract as they agreed to. Okay. Now, generally speaking, okay, so let me first answer this. So the buyer could sue the seller, and then the judge would order an injunction. That's when the judge forces somebody to do something or refrain from doing something. So the judge would order an injunction forcing them to turn over the ownership as agreed to in the contract. Now, generally speaking, a buyer can force a seller to carry out the terms of the contract to sell them the property in this scenario. But a seller, generally speaking, cannot sue a buyer forcing them to take out a 30-year mortgage for a house that they change their mind on that they don't want to buy. The seller would have other routes that they could go by claiming damages and getting money from the buyer rather than forcing them to take ownership of their house that they changed their mind. I don't want to buy this house. I realize, you know what? It's the money pit. I don't want to take out a 30-year mortgage on this. You want to sue me because I breached the contract at this point? Fine, sue me, and then I got to pay you something for damages. But I'm not taking on a 30-year mortgage to buy the money pit that I don't want. generally a judge is not going to force a buyer to do that unless they're a moron. Hang tight, and I'll explain my reasoning behind that when we get to the next slide, explaining that a buyer, well, it's actually coming up in maybe 2 slides from now. I'll explain it really quick. A seller, generally, a buyer can force a seller to sell, but a seller can't force a buyer to buy, unless they're a moron. What do I mean by that? It would require that the buyer take the deed, and the transfer of ownership takes place at time of delivery and acceptance of the deed. So the buyer would have to take possession of the deed. They took ownership. Now, even though they didn't want the property, they took the deed. And now the seller could be like, oh, you took the ownership, now you need to pay me. If you didn't want to take out a 30-year mortgage and purchase the property, then don't take the ownership. You took the ownership. What, did you think I was just going to give you the property? Now you need to pay me for it. You got to be a moron to think that I was just going to give it to you, and because you're in possession of the deed, that's it. So now a judge can force you as a buyer to pay them, to take on that 30-year mortgage and pay them now because you did something moronic. Okay? That's what my explanation of you can't force a buyer to buy unless they're a moron. All right, that's what I meant by that. Okay, hopefully that was clear. And I'll show you that on that slide when we get to it. Let's first now go over the last thing that a buyer can do if a seller defaults. The buyer can sue for compensatory damages. That's money for damages. Anytime you hear damages, they're talking about money, some sort of compensation. All right, now liquidated damages. Before we get into what can a seller do if a buyer defaults, let's first go over this term, liquidated damages. We could highlight it on page 219 and skip forward to 219 briefly just to highlight it. Liquidated damages are an amount of money agreed to in advance by a buyer and a seller that serves as compensation if one of the parties does not live up to the contract. Okay, so that person's usually the buyer. Now, liquidated damages is just an agreement on how much will serve as compensation. It does not specify where the money comes from. If somebody wrote a liquidated damages agreement and specified that the money was going to come from the buyer's deposit if they breached the contract, then the seller cannot get any more money. They cannot seek any more money beyond that. Liquidated damages agreements can be well beyond the buyer's deposit amount. Remember, it's just an agreement on how much serves as compensation. It does not say where that compensation is coming from. So here, I put that side note down here that explains this. There could be additional wording stipulating where the money would come from, but if that's stated in the agreement, for example, that the damages would be paid from the earnest money deposit, the other party could not collect any additional money other than that. Damages are not necessarily coming from earnest money deposits. Damages could exceed the earnest money deposit collected. And in that case, the seller would be screwed because all they'll be able to collect is whatever money they put down. So, what is liquidated damage agreement? Liquidated damages is just an agreement on how much money serves as compensation if one of the parties, usually the buyer, breaches the contract. Okay? It would be an incorrect answer to say liquidated damages are the good faith deposit or earnest money. That's wrong. Liquidated damages is just an agreement on how much money will serve as compensation in the event that somebody breaches the contract. Okay? I harped on that enough. If you guys want, you can snap a picture of this, but let me see. This contract specifies. So I'm not, it has it here. in there as well in the book. It says, if you were to read beyond the highlight, it says, if a sales contract specifies the earnest money deposit serves as liquidated damages in the case of default by the buyer, the seller is entitled to keep the deposit if the buyer refuses to perform for no good reason. The seller who does choose to keep the deposit as liquidated damages may not sue for any further damages, though. All right, so now let's see, in the event the buyer defaults, what can the seller do? Well, if there was a liquidated damage agreement, it's not standard in all contracts, even though the book makes it sound like it is. The seller can declare a contract forfeited if the contract stated they can, and if it was agreed to that they would be awarded compensation from the buyer as liquidated damages. That's where that money's coming from. That's a different story altogether. Or the seller can rescind the contract as if it were never made. However, that would require them to return all the deposit money to that would-be buyer. Or the seller can sue the buyer for specific performance if they're a moron. Remember? However, this would require them to sign over the deed to the buyer and then chase after them for the payment. Or the seller could sue for compensatory damages, forcing the buyer to pay them moolah for breaching the contracts. Okay, so let's do those highlights here. Everybody got that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. now the rest of this chapter is pretty much going to be a recap of different things we've already gone over. Contracts, disclosures, all kinds of stuff like that. For the most part, I think most of the stuff is not going to be new, but we'll have maybe one or two new things left in this chapter. So, preparation of documents. New Jersey licensees were only allowed to prepare contracts for 1 to 4 families and single buildable lots. Everything else is considered commercial, and attorneys need to prepare those contracts. The contracts that we prepare, we're not writing from scratch. These were already written up by attorneys and approved by the Real Estate Commission for us to use. And we just need to fill in the blanks pretty much. Now, commercial properties, real estate licensees, we can help get the ball rolling in these, even though we don't write the contracts. We can prepare a non-binding term sheet, also known as a letter of intent, to get the ball rolling with all of the agreed upon terms between the parties. And then we turn that over to an attorney who writes the actual contract based on those terms. Contracts must indicate the business relationships with respect to the parties involved in the contracts here. Just about every contract and disclosure we have, there's a checkbox there. I intend to represent the seller, not the buyer not the seller, both the seller and the buyer or neither. Okay, that's in most of our contracts. We also have the Opinion 26 notice that needs to be sitting as the cover page on top of any contract that real estate licensees prepare. What is the Opinion 26 notice? It says you have the right to have an attorney review the contract, make any changes to it, or cancel it. Okay, it's informing them of their rights to hire a lawyer. All the parties, before they sign the contract, that needs to be sitting right on top of the contract as the cover page. I think that's the way they even word it on exam questions. What is the document that's to be sitting on top of any contract prepared by licensees, informing them that they have a right to hire a lawyer? The Opinion 26 notice. So New Jersey requires the following statement be added to the top of the first page of the actual sales contract, not the cover page, but the actual sales contract or lease contract that we prepare. And it'll be, this is a legally binding contract. Now it says a little bit more than that. The full phrase is actually, this is a legally binding contract that'll become final within 3 business days. During this period, you may choose to consult an attorney who can review and cancel the contract. That's a little bit different than the Opinion 26 that's sitting on top of it, which is the actual disclosure of your rights to hire a lawyer. And then all contracts prepared by licensees must disclose their agency relationships. You know, who are you representing in this transaction? That's usually a checkbox. I represent the seller, not the buyer not the seller, both the seller and the buyer or neither, if you're acting as a transaction broker. So here's a screenshot from the top of the sales contract that we use. It says this is a legally binding contract. And then it goes on to say the rest of the paragraph. And that's for one contract. And here's a different kind of contract that, let me see, New Jersey also requires this. Okay, so this is another contract. So here's the actual attorney review process and how it works. And this is actually written in on the contracts, the sales contracts as well. Now, I wrote this up a little bit. These words are not verbatim, what you see in the book. This is just an explanation where it says study by attorney, counting at time, and notice of disapproval. The words are a little bit different on the actual contract, but this is essentially what they do. Okay. So this is section 35 of the actual contract. In the sales or lease contracts, this is what it's pretty much says. you have three parts to it. Study by the attorneys. Both parties must receive a duplicate original of the fully executed contract. Then we start counting of time to deliver the fully executed contract to both sides' attorneys to start the review process and make any changes or cancel the contract. The counting of time, we count 3 business days. We don't count weekends or legal holidays. Review period can be extended or temporarily halted if both sides agree. To begin attorney review, to make modifications or to cancel the contract, otherwise it becomes legally binding as it is. Nobody can make changes to the contract without the other side's approval. And then we have the notice of disapproval. So once the one side sends the attorney review letter to the other to kick off the attorney review process, it's usually with a letter that's worded something like this. We received your contract for fill in the address. However, we disapprove of the contract in its current format, but if you agree to the following proposed changes, we could conclude attorney review, and then you'd be in a legally binding contract. And then it goes off to the other side. The other side gets it, and they have 3 days to review it, make any changes or propose changes, and send it back to the other side. And then they have 3 days to review that and then respond to it. And so each side has 3 days to respond to the last correspondence. I usually ask the attorneys when I send them the contracts and let them know that there's a review. I also send them a cover letter of all the parties and the contact information, email, phone number, fax number for everybody involved. Both sides attorneys, both sides real estate agents, and the mortgage lender. And then I ask them to CC all correspondence between attorneys, to copy both real estate agents on all correspondence between attorneys during the review process. And I ask my clients to call their attorneys to make sure that they do it, because the attorneys don't have to listen to us. It's a request. And I've come across a couple hard-nosed attorneys. For some reason, they didn't want to correspond, so we didn't know what's going on. So as far as we know, the original attorney review letter has never been sent out or answered. So you got to reach out to your clients and have your clients order the attorneys who are working for them to do what we want them to do, and copy us on all correspondence between attorneys so that we could see they're communicating and what's any proposed changes to the contracts. We need to know this, right? But some attorneys, they don't play ball for whatever reason. Okay, so the notice of disapproval, one side's attorney starts the review process, acknowledging receipt of the contract and proposes changes to it. Each side has 3 days to respond, 3 business days to respond, and this goes back and forth until one side agrees to the final terms. We call this the meeting of the minds. So the meeting of the minds is once both parties come to an agreement on all the terms of the contract and sign off on them. They're now in a legally binding contract, and attorney review has been concluded. That's how attorney review works. The actual attorney review clause reads a little bit differently. Let me pull up a sales contract and show you what it actually says. So here's an actual contract. Well, this is the cover letter, is the opinion 26 notice, right? And then you have the contract, section 35, attorney review clause. You see that? It says right here, attorney review clause. This is the table of contents of the contract. Let me try to get this full screen to you. There you go, a little bigger. You can see it a little better now, right? Okay, so attorney review clause. And you see each section of the contract is numbered. There is line numbers for every line in the contract, and then there's sections. Number 1, parties and property description. See, parties and property description. So we got to go down to 35 to see the attorney review clause. So I'm going to scroll down to get to 35. Yeah, the contract's long. Bear with me. Almost there. Almost there. There we go. So the attorney review. Buyer and seller may choose, so there's study by attorney, counting of time, and notice of disapproval. But it doesn't have the same exact words I just had on my slide. My slide was there just to explain to you how it actually works. But this is how the explanation is actually written on the contract. Number one, study by attorneys. Buyer and seller may choose to have an attorney study this contract. If attorney is consulted, the attorney must complete their review in the contract within a 3-day period. The contract will be legally binding at the end of the 3-day period unless an attorney for the buyer and seller reviews and disapproves of the contract. You count 3 days from the date of delivery of the signed contract to both the buyer and seller. You don't count Saturdays, Sundays, or legal holidays, and the buyer and seller may agree in writing to extend the 3-day period for review. Actually, they can also halt the attorney review until the happening of an event, if they please. And if the attorney for the buyer and seller review and disapprove the contract, the attorney must notify the broker and the other party named in the contract within 3-day period. Otherwise, the contract will be legally binding as written. The attorney must send a notice of disapproval to the brokers by fax, email, or personal delivery. Yeah, I wish they gave us the review back and forth, not just the cancelization. Or overnight mail with proof of delivery. Notice by overnight mail will be effective upon mailing. The personal delivery will be effective upon delivery to the broker's office. The attorney may also, but need not, inform the brokers of any suggested revisions in the contract that would make it satisfactory. Maybe you could actually write in that section or put an addition at the end of the contract that your buyers and sellers sign. Here's a good way to do it. Just realize that. You could write it in the actual contract itself that requests that attorneys copy both real estate agents in the transaction for all correspondence between them for attorney review. I don't know why I never thought of that before. I've been doing it for years. I've been contacting them directly and having to deal with the owners and stuff. But really, the buyers and the sellers, your clients, they sign the contract. You could actually just write that into the contract, giving them those instructions. Damn. Why didn't I think of that sooner? Well, there you go. I gave you guys an idea. That's actually a pretty damn good idea. All right. So this is the actual sales contract. A copy of it anyway that we actually use. I'm gonna share that with you it's in a shared Google Drive. You guys already have access to it. These are just some of those documents that are in that shared drive. So this is how attorney review works. If you guys want to snap a picture of mine, go ahead. 3 business days. Okay, we have to give, if the property was built prior to 1978, we have to also have the seller first fill out, and then the buyer the federal lead paint disclosure form, as well as give them a copy of the lead paint pamphlet and a 10-day opportunity to conduct an inspection or waive that inspection entirely if they want to close any sooner. So here's the lead paint disclosure form. And here is the the lead paint booklets, the pamphlets. All right, contracts. We have listing agreements. Every MLS got their own listing agreement. Exclusive buyer brokerage agreements. I like the ones now that are built into the brokerage service agreements. We have designated agency agreements, transaction broker. We have dual agency agreements, and we have the actual contract itself. These are all links to them in the shared Google Drive. So I'm not going to give you the links to everything. You guys already have them in the email I sent you to the shared Google Drive. You could explore in there and see the contracts and disclosures that we actually use. So there's no official name to the sales contract. Some people call it a sales contract. Some people call it a purchase contract. You know, don't get all bent out of shape if somebody doesn't refer to it the same way you do. Look, it's also known as an offer to purchase, contract of purchase and sale, earnest money agreement, or a binder and deposit receipt, or many other variations. So call it whatever the heck you want. There's no official name for the contract, okay? That's just the gist of it. All right, offer and acceptance. So one of the essential elements of a meeting of the minds is where the buyer and seller agree on the terms of the sale. And that's accomplished through the process of offer and acceptance. A broker lists the owner's real estate for sale at the price and conditions that are set by the owner, because it is the owner who decides what their listing price is. We help guide them to a reasonable number by doing how do we help them come up with a reasonable asking price? How do we help the owners value their property?
Something with the M.
A CMA, comparative market analysis. Yep, should never be called an appraisal or considered the equivalent of one. So page 216 and 217, let's highlight these notes and write these things in there. And then we'll get to the next slide where I'll go over them with you. Let me know when everybody got all those notes and highlights. Writing those notes that I wrote there is important too, though.
Okay, got it.
Everybody got it, or anybody still writing?
I got it.
All right. So, one of the essential elements of a valid contract is a meeting of the minds, where the parties to the contract are aware and in agreement on all the terms of the contract. And this is done by the process of offer and acceptance. So this is how it works in a nutshell. First, the seller lists the property for sale at a certain agreed upon price. A buyer makes an offer at that full listing price, or perhaps another amount, which their broker then presents to the seller or their agent within 24 hours. The seller then accepts that offer, rejects it, or makes a counter offer, which is basically a rejection of the buyer's initial offer. So at that point, the buyer's free to walk away if that happens. If the seller makes a counter offer, the buyer can accept it, reject it, or counter it as well. Then they go back and forth like this until one of the parties agrees to the other's terms. And when they do, this is called a meeting of the minds, and the offer is accepted pending attorney review. It's still not a legally binding contract until attorney review is concluded or 3 business days pass without doing any review. In contract negotiations, when is an offer considered accepted? When the last person who made an offer has simply been notified, or their agent has been notified that the offer's been accepted. You need to understand this. This will probably be an exam question, hint, hint. So this could be done verbally. However, it's suggested and always a good practice to follow up and get it in writing. But technically, for exam purposes, it's not required to get it in writing in order for the offer to be considered accepted. So, if you get a question on exams, in contract negotiations, when is an offer considered accepted? When the person who made the last offer had been notified of its acceptance, and their agent's been notified. This could be done verbally, over the phone. It's always a good practice to follow up with getting it in writing and then to sign off to those agreed upon finalized terms. But technically, you're an agent, and remember our fiduciary duties of disclosure and notice. Anytime that we've been notified, anytime something's been disclosed to us or notified to, we've been notified of something, it's as if our client's been told, because we have a fiduciary duty and obligation to go back and notify them. Hey, your offer just, the other agent called me and they told me your offer was accepted. So now the offer is accepted. Now, really, legally, can somebody's feet be held to the fire for that? No. I've made offers before. We've been told our offer is accepted. And then I'm like, hey, how come we didn't start attorney review yet? How come you didn't sign the paperwork following up with those agreed accepted terms so that we could get the attorney review rolling? Well, if your client's still interested, tell them to make their highest and best offer, because we're waiting for somebody and expecting somebody to make another offer on the property. Wait a minute, you said our offer was already accepted. Well, if your client's interested, tell them to make their highest and best offer. I went back to my client and I told them they're jerking us around. They told us the offer's been accepted, and now they said they're waiting for another offer, expecting another offer to come in. I'm assuming that they had an open house during the weekend and now they're expecting a couple offers to come in. And then they keep contacting me now after this. So I told them that, and they said, you know what, screw them. So I was like, okay, we'll look for another property. And now that other agent keeps calling me. If your client's interested still, tell them to make their highest and best offer. That person's going to be coming in and with the contract to sign the contract for the higher offer soon. I said, choke on it. We're not interested anymore. Get a call again. Well, you know, that first person fell through, but we're expecting the other person to come in tomorrow. So if your client's still interested, I said, you screwed up, buddy. My client was interested. We made an offer. We put it in writing. And now you're trying to pit us against others to try to get a bidding war going. We're not interested. You know, we're here. We have a legitimate offer. You could tell your client that you screwed up. You know, we rescind our offer. Okay? There's no offer from us anymore. Stop calling me. You know, and they call back again. Okay, well, they're supposed to be coming in later today. They didn't come in this morning, but they're going to come in later today and sign the contract if the client's still interested. I was like, are you stupid? What did I tell you yesterday? You're playing games with us. You're jerking us around. We made a legitimate offer. You didn't accept it. So we rescinded the offer. Okay. You're now playing games with us. So we're not interested. I told you my client rescinded their offer. Go tell your client our offer's rescinded. And it's because of these games you're playing. I doubt they went and they told them that, but they had a fiduciary duty to, but I doubt they did. Okay. But sometimes that happens. But anyway, for your exams, in contract negotiations, when's an offer considered accepted? Simply when the other party's been notified it's been accepted. But if you don't have it in writing, good luck trying to start attorney review. Okay, earnest money deposit. It is customary but not essential for a purchaser to provide a cash deposit or a check when making an offer to purchase real estate. The cash deposit commonly is referred to as an earnest money or good faith deposit. It basically shows that the buyer is operating in good faith. It gives evidence of the buyer's intention to carry out the terms of the contract. And the deposits given to the broker and the sales contract typically provides the broker or seller's attorney will hold that deposit money until closing. And if the offer is not accepted, the earnest money deposits return to the would-be buyer immediately. A credit card may not be used for earnest money deposits. Now, the amount of the deposits a matter to be agreed upon by the parties. Generally, the deposit should be sufficient to discourage the buyer from defaulting and to compensate the seller for taking their property off the market and cover any expenses the seller might incur if the buyer defaults. A purchase offer with no earnest money, however, is still valid. Most contracts taking the property off the market and cover any expense. Okay, wait. Where's the part with most contracts? 17. Most contracts provide taking the property off the market and cover any expenses the seller may incur if the buyer defaults. A purchase offer with no earnest money, however, is still valid. Some contracts provide that the deposit becomes the seller's property if the buyer defaults as liquidated damages. They would have to write a liquidated damage agreement in the contract. Standard sales contracts do not have that wording in them. You'd have to write it in. The book makes it sound like all the contracts have that in there. Let's take a look at the latest contracts from several slides back. Oh, wait, I think I still should have it open. Here, you guys can highlight this. In the meantime, while I go look for it. Yeah, it's still open. So let me see if their standard contract has anything in there, any updates to it that talk about liquidated damages or the escrow funds. Let's see. So I'm not sure. You guys got all those highlights?
Yes.
Okay, so back to the contract here, you could see in the table of contents. They don't talk about the damages. What do they say? Dates and times for performance. Let's take a look at that. That's section 8. Is that? Okay, that doesn't say anything about damages. See these other sections here. Failure of buyer or seller to close. Let's see what that's about. That's section 27. No, that's 26. Here we go. Failure of buyer or seller to close. Okay, so here it says they made it part of the contract now. If seller fails to close title to the property in accordance with the contract, buyer may commence a legal equitable action to which the buyer may be entitled. If the buyer fails to close title in accordance with this contract, seller may commence an action for damages it has suffered. And in such case, the deposit monies paid on account of the purchase price shall be applied against such damages. If the buyer or seller breach this contract, the breaching party will nevertheless be liable to brokers for their commissions in the amount set forth in the contract, as well as reasonable attorney fees, costs, or such other damages as determined by a court. If either seller or buyer commences such action, in addition to any other remedy, the prevailing party will be entitled to reasonable attorney fees. Okay, look at that. Well, it's good they actually mention our commissions in there that will be entitled to it too. Hey, good. That's new. And they talk about damages. So now if that buyer or seller takes the good faith deposit as damages, well, they can't collect anything beyond that, right? Because liquidated damages would be an agreement on how much would serve as compensation. Doesn't say where it comes from. So the earnest money, this is beyond that. That would be a further agreement beyond that, because this is just talking about earnest money. Let's see if there's something else here that talks about that. Brokers Information Commission, equitable liens, disclosure, sellers of real estate licensee, professional attorney review clause, electronic documents, corporate resolutions, entire agreements. Nope. Let's see what equitable lien is about, section 31. Oh, talks about our commissions. Let's see what it says about our commissions. Under New Jersey law, brokers who bring the parties together in a real estate transaction are entitled to an equitable lien in the amount of their commission. This lien attaches to the property being sold from when the contract of sale is signed until the closing, and then to the funds are due to the seller at closing, and is not contingent upon the notice provided in this section. As a result of this lien, the party who disperses the funds at the closing in the transaction should not release any portion of the commission to any party other than the brokers. And if there is a dispute with regard to the commission to be paid, should hold the dispute amount in escrow until the dispute with the brokers is resolved and a written authorization. Good. That deals with us having to chase around our commissions. Good. All right. So anyway, liquidated damages. And then they go on to say down here, you know, any cash deposits of $10,000 or more needs to be reported to the IRS. Remember that? Deposit monies need to be put in a, here comes the rain, special escrow or trust account. It cannot be commingled or mixed with the broker's own money. All right. And I got all that here on this one slide too. But I'm okay, so I'm also explaining that the buyer breaches the contract, the seller could make a claim to keep. All right. And about the reporting of the IRS, keeping the money in the escrow account for short periods of time. When does the money need to be deposited into the escrow account? Within 5 business days. So once again, a good slide. Take a picture of. It explains the escrow money, the good faith deposit. The offer is still valid even if they didn't make a good faith deposit, but customarily it should be about $1,000. But the offer is still valid even if it's not accompanied by a good faith deposit. Any questions? All right, so the meeting of the minds, not the first time you've seen this one. It's when the parties are in agreement on all the terms of the contract. And for school exam, it's when the parties are in agreement on price, down payment, and financing method. And what's a kickback? Giving anything of value back to an unlicensed person in exchange for a lead. Like giving a friend a television or a trench coat or a pocketbook or fancy shoes or a gift card in exchange for a lead. That's kickback. They're illegal. Who can you pay as a real estate agent? Nobody. Who can you be paid by? Only your broker. And who can your brokers pay? Only their agents, another broker, or the buyer of a primary residence in the form of a buyer's rebate. So these are the essential elements of a valid contract. Contracts must be in writing. Got to have competent parties, agreement to buy and sell, an adequate description of the property. You guys remember what are the legal descriptions of a property? Oh, wait. No, we didn't go over that yet. There has to be an adequate description of the property. the consideration, the full purchase price, legal tender, exchange of value, or that it's a gift, the love and affection. There has to be a grantor's agreement to convey the property, and the place and time of closing should be stated. And signatures of all the parties with initials on the bottom of each and every page of the contract, so nobody can swap out one of the pages on you. You don't have the parties just sign the last page of the contract where their signatures are. Make sure they initial the bottom of every page so they can't just replace a page with another. These are the non-essential parts of a valid contract that could be included in contracts, but these are not mandatory because not all contracts these things will apply to. Like encumbrances to which a deed can be subject to, those deed restrictions. Earnest money deposit. It's common, but it's not required. Mortgage financing the buyer plans to obtain. What if they buy cash? The possession by the buyer. When is that going to be? The title evidence, prorations and adjustments. These are things the closing agents do. They don't put them in contracts. What happens in the event of destruction of the premises? That's actually standard in our contracts, but it's not required for any contract in the state of New Jersey for them to be valid. Our contracts have a lot more than, this is just talking about what are the essential or non-essential elements of a contract. It does not, our contracts that we use actually have most of this stuff in it. Like what happens in the event of destruction of the premises? What happens if the property burns down if you're under contract to buy it? Anybody know? The seller is responsible to keep it insured and keep it in good shape, so they're responsible to fix anything and deliver it in the same shape as you've seen it in. What happens in the event of defaults by either party? I just read you one of the sections that go over that. The final walkthrough on the day of closing, that's when it should occur. Let's see what they say in the actual contract pertaining to the final walkthrough. Where is it? Final walkthrough. That here's something. If anybody sees it before me, let me know what section you're seeing it in. Oh, right, here it is. Initial and final walkthroughs, section 25. In addition to the inspections set forth elsewhere in this contract, seller agrees to permit the buyer or buyer's duly authorized representative to conduct an initial and final walkthrough inspection of the interior and exterior of the property at any reasonable time before closing. Seller shall have all utilities in service for inspections. It's not a bad idea to also write into the sales contracts that the seller shall not cancel the utilities without giving the buyer the opportunity to first transfer them into their name, and should arrange for final meter readings before that transfer. All right. Contingency, these are happenings in which a contract is dependent upon or subject to. And signatures of witnesses are not essential for the contract to be valid, even though we as a real estate agent are usually signing as the witness after telling them sign here, initial there, sign there. We witness their signatures. You should also check their IDs. These are other common contractual contingencies. FHA and VA loans have a special addendum clause that must be added to the contract that says if the property does not appraise for the purchase price, the buyer can get out of the contract without penalty. We're going to go over some of these things. It's subject to engineering reports, escape clauses, liquidated damage agreements, short sales, subject to family members' approval, subject to zoning or building permit approvals. Okay. So let's do a highlight here on page 219. And here where you highlight escape clause, right here, escape, kick out, or knockout clause protects the seller. What is a contingency? I just read this to you a second ago. What is a contingency?
A clause for an unforeseen circumstance.
It's a happening or condition that the contract is dependent upon. If contingencies are not met, those are ways for people to get out of the contract. Like the FHA or VA loan special contingency clause must be included in the sales contract that provides that the contract may be voided if the property appraises below the sales price. Right? The buyer's getting a loan. If the appraiser says the house ain't worth it, are you still required to purchase the property at that inflated price? The lender's not going to give you a loan for more than what the appraiser says that it's worth. So you could get out of that contract without penalty. You're not considered in breach of contract. Or if you want, you could knowingly reach deep in your pockets and pay the difference out of your pocket. Why would you want to? So let's see, provisions could be added stipulating the seller furnish satisfactory reports on termite and insect infestations, quality of the private water supply, or conditions of plumbing or heating systems. In some transfers, a certificate of occupancy has to be obtained from the municipality, and the contract should make it clear whose responsibility that is. It's usually the seller. The purchaser may add a stipulation that allows a walkthrough inspection. Well, that's standard in our contracts now. Common provisions is the subject to section. That's where when you see subject to, that's a contingency. This purchase is subject to fill in the blank, right? Here, subject to an engineering report, subject to an escape clause, subject to liquidated damage agreement, subject to short sales, third party or lender approval, subject to family members approval because we're getting the money from them to purchase the property or for the down payment or closing cost. And if they don't give us the approval, then we don't have the money. So you can't hold us to the contract for that because we're disclosing now that that's where we're getting the money to buy your house. And if they don't approve it, we can't go through with it. So our job as real estate agents is to remove contingencies as soon as possible. So before you ever write the contract, it's a better idea to get any family members whose approval is needed to get them through the house to look at it and give their approval before you write the contract. That'll make your contract more solid, okay, than saying, hey, this contract is subject to all these people giving their approval. Okay, and let me give you a little tip here. Anybody can have relatives that are helping them with the money for the deposit, down payment, or the money just to purchase the property outright. However, by far, in my experience, I've seen this happen way more with Indian families. So, I mean, you should ask everybody this, but especially with Indian families, because this is very common, where their family and even extended family will help give them money to purchase a house. So you should ask those purchasers, how are you getting the money to purchase? Are you getting a loan, or do you have the cash, or having relatives helping you out with any of the money. Because we need to make this as a contingency in the contract or get all their approval before we put the contract together. I mean, if we're putting a contract together and you got 20 family members that are helping with the money, with the purchase, writing down that this contract is contingent upon getting approval from 20 different family members doesn't make your offer seem too strong, does it? So get them through the property first before you write that contract. I've had this happen before, and we've had 3 carloads of family members that needed to get their approval. And they told me this when I was writing the contract. And I was like, you know what? I put the contract down. I was like, let's set up an appointment. Can we get all your family members possibly to come at one time during the day? You know, and I'll set up another appointment and we could show it to all of them and they could give their approval or disapproval then before we, otherwise, why are we wasting our time putting a contract together? Can we do that? And they arranged for it. And then we did that. And we got all the family members through. However, they still had 2 family members that were driving down from Canada. So, yeah, but you know what? It's better than writing 20 people's names that this contract is subject to rather than just 2 people, you know? So I put 2 people's names in there and got everybody else through in advance. Everybody got these highlights and wrote these notes down already?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so here's some of those contingencies that I was telling you about. You guys want to snap a picture of this? Snap a picture of this. Yeah, these are a bunch of different types of contingencies that a contract can be made subject to. This isn't in the book. This is additional that I'm giving you in the lesson. This is an additional slide. So snap a picture of this slide for your own edification so that you have knowledge of it, okay? Now, escape clause, also known as a kick-out or knockout clause, you just highlighted that in the book, though. What is that exactly? It's when a seller puts their property up on the market for sale, and a buyer makes an offer to purchase the property. However, the purchase is subject to the sale of their current home. They may not be able to go through with this purchase unless they sell their current home. Now, the seller has the option of accepting that offer, or what I would do as the seller's agent is ask them to include an escape clause in the contract that basically says, okay, buyer, we will accept your offer that's subject to the sale of your current home, but is it even on the market first? Let's find that out before we accept it. Is it on the market? Is it under contract? It should be. So now we'll accept your offer that's subject to the sale of your house that's currently under contract and ready to close. However, we want you to add an escape clause to the contract that says the seller is allowed to continue marketing the property. And in the event they get another offer that's acceptable to the seller, they'll come back to you and ask you if you're prepared to remove that as a contingency. Are you ready to close yet on your house and remove that as a contingency? And if you're not, they're allowed to cancel the contract with you so that they could accept the other offer, because your offer is taking longer than anticipated to sell because of your sale contingency of your house, which should have closed already. Okay, so you see how an escape clause protects the seller? It allows them to continue marketing their property to find another buyer in the event they're going to accept an offer from a buyer whose offer is contingent on the sale of their property.
Is that usually how you handle that situation? Somebody needs to sell their house? That's what you do?
A lot of agents don't even know about an escape clause or to write it in. They'll just say, okay, we'll accept your offer that's contingent on the sale of your home. I write into my contracts a escape, kick out, or knockout clause, it's known as, that basically says, okay, we'll accept your offer. However, the seller is allowed to keep the property active in the MLS so that we could continue marketing it and find another buyer And if we do find another buyer that makes an acceptable offer before you close on the sale of your home, we're allowed to come back to you. We'll come back to you first and see if you're ready to remove that as a contingency, because you should be ready to close by then, you know? And if you're not, the seller will cancel the contract with you and not be in breach of contract so that we could accept the other offer. How about that? You want us to accept the offer subject to the sale of your home? Well, we'll do that, but you got to agree to allow us to continue marketing it to find another buyer in the event that, you take forever. That's basically what it's saying. That's fair, right? So that's what it's
For the seller. If you're the buyer and you're having trouble selling your house, that's pain.
Well, how's it fair for the buyer that they need to leave their property off the market waiting for you to sell your house that's taking forever? You got to work with each other on this. This is how we come up with these, this is how we make deals amicable to both parties involved. All right. So these are just a bunch of different contingencies. A lot of them are self-explanatory. Okay. Liquidated damages, you guys already highlighted this. We already had this slide, so I could skip that. New Jersey has a plain language requirement, which is kind of ridiculous. It's like a one sentence now in the book. It used to be half a page. Now it's only reduced to one sentence because you could see why. New Jersey has a plain language requirement. There are words that could be used in contracts that have separate legalese meanings to them. So New Jersey has a plain language requirement that says contracts to sell real estate must use plain language words that don't have separate legalese meanings to them. However, that only applies to properties valued under $50,000. Not a whole lot of them left in New Jersey, huh? Okay, here's that rescission period again for contracts and mortgage financing. We've had this in most of the chapters we've gone through already. If you have not seen this yet, you may want to snap a picture of it to know the different rescission periods. Anybody need to snap a picture of it? Or I'm just going to change the slide so that we get through this chapter before we got to go. All right. So these are the reasons for rescission of a contract. We could highlight this on page 220. There's no right of rescission for purchase money mortgages to buy real estate. However, there is a 3-day right of rescission for loans to cancel refinancing of property you already own. And then there's that 7-day right of rescission for new construction and that have common interest communities like condominiums and co-ops and subdivided property. There's also that 7-day right of rescission for out-of-state properties marketed to New Jersey residents too, remember? And then right here under where it says does not apply to resales, meaning there's no right of rescission for resale properties. Let me know when you have all that. Anybody still writing or no?
Yep, got it.
No, I'm good.
Okay, and option agreements, they should be prepared by attorneys in New Jersey. Here's where we could highlight that now in the book. Any option contract in New Jersey, they should be prepared by attorneys. That's on page 220. Just do like I did here. Highlight the title, draw an arrow down to the last line, and highlight in New Jersey, they should be prepared by attorneys. All right. And land contracts. Here's where we'll highlight the land contracts. And this is the last new thing. And then I think we're done after this. Let me see. Yeah. So land contracts, also known as a contract for deed or an installment sales contract, is a method of seller financing. And then go down and highlight equitable title. The seller does not execute and deliver a deed until the terms of the contract have been fulfilled. In other words, the buyers paid off the balance of what they agreed on. I'll give you a better definition and explanation of land contracts on the next slide once you highlight this. Everybody got those two lines highlighted? So this is a land contract. This is actually a better explanation. I would snap a picture of this. Land contract is a type of seller financing, also known as an installment sales contract, where a buyer makes payments in installments and waits for the deed. It's kind of like a lease to own. The owner does not turn over the deed to the buyer until the full purchase price or another agreed upon amount has been paid, and then at that point the buyer would get a loan to pay off the rest of it. Until the buyer pays off the full amount, they actually do not get the deed to the ownership of the property. However, they have a financial interest in the property because they've been making payments towards the equity, towards the ownership, building equity towards the ownership of it. And that's called equitable title. So even though they don't yet own the real estate, they do have a financial interest towards the ownership. So anybody who's doing like a rent to own situation, if you ever go to that landlord tenant court, a landlord cannot just simply evict a tenant they cannot just simply be evicted as a normal renter would, because they're more than just a tenant. They've been paying money to purchase the property. So it becomes more of a complicated situation for courts. They're more than a tenant, they're less than an owner. So it's easier to get them out than foreclosure, harder to get them out than a simple renter, because they have a financial interest in the property. So if the buyer fails to continue making payments, the seller does not need to go through the hassle of foreclosure because the buyer doesn't own the property. But it is harder to get them out than a simple renter because they have a financial interest, that equitable title. I have a definition here for equity. What is equity? Equity is the difference between the market value of a property and what is owed on it. It's that built-in value. Usually at the time you purchase a property, your equity is equal to your down payment. Now, equity can be built in three different ways. Maybe there's more ways, but there's three common ways equity is built. You pay down the debt of what you owe on the property. Or the market values simply fluctuate and go up. Or you force an increase in equity by doing improvements to the property. You do a remodel, put additions on it. That increases the value, therefore increasing the difference between the market value of the property and what you owe on it. Okay. Here's things that you need to prepare, and I got some links here for you of how to prepare a sales contract. You may want to just snap a picture and then we'll move on to the next one. I just want to get through this chapter really quick. We're almost done. These are extra slides. We're pretty much done with the book for this chapter. So you got this. And then you got this. These are things that can be added into sales contracts. And then we have this. And that's it. So let's do the key terms to review, and we're done with this chapter. On page 222 and 223, there are two key terms to review. Okay, contract that has been fulfilled or one that has been signed, depending on the contract. What do we call a contract that's been fulfilled or signed?
Executed.
An executed contract, 12 is A. Buyer's deposit with the purchase contract. What do we call that deposit?
Earnest money.
Yes, 9 is B. Contract with a promise made by each party. Both parties are required to do something.
Bilateral.
2 is C, bilateral contract. Contract set down in so many words.
Express.
An express contract. Correct. 14 is D. A transfer of interest in a contract to a third party.
Assignment.
1 is E. Those legally qualified to enter into contracts.
Competent.
Competent parties. 4 is F. Protection for seller when a buyer has another house to sell.
Escape clause.
Also known as a kick-out or knockout clause. Yes, 11 is G. Something of value given in exchange.
Consideration.
Consideration.
5 is H, consideration. Violation of a contract.
Breach.
Breach of contract. 3 is I. Interest acquired by a buyer with a land contract.
Equitable title.
Yeah, we just went over that. Yep, 10 is J, equitable title. A contract that has not yet been performed. All the terms haven't been fully carried out. What status is the contract in?
Executory.
Yes, executory contract. 13 is K. Offer, return to offeror with changes by offeree.
Counteroffer.
Counteroffer.
A counteroffer. 8 is L. Very good. Contract not put into words but shown by actions.
Implied.
An implied contract. 15 is M. Certain happening on which a contract is dependent upon.
Contingency.
Yes, 6 is N, contingency. An agreement between two parties to perform some legal act.
Contract.
The contract, 7 is O. An agreement in which a buyer makes payments in installments and then they wait for the deed.
Land contract.
Yes, 16 is P. And next to land contract, write installment sales contracts, because it's also known as, it could also be referred to as that on your exams. All right, key terms 2. A
Can you
return.
repeat that one again?
Oh, which one? Oh, installment sales contract next to land contract. You're writing installment sales contract because you're making payments in installments and waiting for the deed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. A return to the status quo, meaning returning to the way you started.
Rescission.
Yeah, it's a weird way to define it, but yeah, 6 is A, rescission. Another name for an option contract.
Unilateral.
12 is B, a unilateral contract. A law requiring certain contracts be in writing.
Statute of frauds.
Yep, 8 is C. A contract that is binding, but one party may disaffirm it. One party.
15.
I'm sorry?
Contract.
It's a voidable contract.
Yeah.
Voidable.
15 is D, yes. A sum agreed on to serve as damages in the event of future default.
Liquidated damages.
1 is E, liquidated damages. The process of reaching a meeting of the minds. It's also known as
Offer and acceptance.
offer and acceptance. 3 is F. Substitution of a new contract for an existing one. Substitution of a new contract for an existing.
Innovation.
Yeah, that's worded weirdly, but yeah, you're substituting an existing contract with a new one. I don't. They word it so backwards. Well, yes, you're correct. 2 is G, novation. A contract that meets all legal requirements.
Valid contract.
It is a valid contract. 13 is H. Time within which one is allowed to assert their legal rights.
Statute of limitations.
9 is I, the statute of limitations. A court action usually asking that the seller be forced to sell as they agreed.
Specific performance.
Yep. 7 is J, specific performance. A convention that a written contract overrides spoken promises. It says written contracts take precedence over verbal agreements.
Parole evidence rule.
Yep. 5 is K. Contract that does not meet all the legal requirements.
Void contract.
It's void. 14 is L. Seemingly valid contract, but neither party can sue to force performance.
Unenforceable contract.
Correct. 11 is M, unenforceable contract. Contract binding one party, the other party's free to act or not.
Option.
You have an option. That's describing an option. 4 is N. Contract clause requiring punctual performance. Strict deadline in a contract.
Time is of the essence.
Time is of the essence. 10 is O. And that concludes chapter 11. So